Hello friends, I'm your storyteller for the night, and today I'm here to help you relax, but also bring a little thrill. I know you're looking for a quiet space to fall asleep, but are you ready to face a story that makes your heart beat faster? If you're ready, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to my channel. And don't hesitate to share where you are and what time you watch this video. This is the most precious gift, giving me more motivation to continue telling stories. Let yourself relax, breathe deeply and feel each sound in the video. The sound of rain falling outside, the sound of wind whistling through the door, is it making you feel that this space is becoming colder and more mysterious? The city under my window is like a sparkling sea of artificial stars, but if you pay close attention, you will see something strange, like a shadow wandering in the night. Do you have a feeling about the existence of invisible things in this world? Sometimes, what we feel is not always easy to explain. At first, I was simply watching the city from the window, but a strange change occurred. Every night, at 3:14 a.m., a man appears on the opposite balcony. It was as if he had a secret agenda, a ghostly routine that never changed. From my position, on the 12th floor, I could see every detail: the white hair, the skeleton wearing an old bowler hat, the worn vintage three-piece suit, as if he were a ghost from the past lost in the present. His cigar always glows magically in the dark. The red light of the cigarette seemed to have a soul hiding in it, like an evil eye staring at me. The smoke coming out of the cigarette was not just smoke, but seemed to have blurry images, ghosts passing through that smoke. I couldn't explain why, but I felt a strange connection between me and that man. It feels like he's watching me every night, and I can't stop thinking about him. My job is as a furniture restorer. I spend most of my time in the apartment, among the old wooden furniture, which is being revived from the stains of time. My hands were calloused, with small cuts from the tools I used to work. But this profession gives me a sense of satisfaction. Ancient items seem to contain stories that can only be felt when you restore them. But that was before he showed up. 3 months ago, on a night like any other, I was working late at a Victorian writing desk. The smell of lacquer, varnish, and polished wood permeated the air, enveloping the room. The repetitive sanding and polishing movements put me in a meditative state, calming the chaotic thoughts in my head. But suddenly, at around 3 a.m., I felt a change in the air. I raised my head and saw him for the first time. He stood there, on the balcony, completely motionless. It seemed that the smoke from his cigar was not blown away by the wind, but was like a haunting cloud, clinging to the surrounding space. The distance between us was about 30 steps, but I felt like he was right next to me, like a ghost that could reach out and touch me at any moment. I don't know why, but over the course of the following nights, his presence seemed to become something indispensable in my life. Every time I work late, I feel his cold gaze penetrating the space. The long sleepless nights passed in extreme tension, as if someone was always standing behind me, watching my every step. And then, one night, while I was repairing an old leather chair, a strange noise came from the opposite balcony. I turned to look, and he wasn't as motionless as usual. This time, he was looking straight at me, his eyes, or more accurately the red light from his cigarette, as if trying to pierce my mind. Suddenly, I felt a cold wind blowing past me, and suddenly everything in the room became dark. No more rain, no more wind. The only sound was my breathing, heavy and urgent. I quickly closed all the windows, but the inexplicable feeling of fear was overwhelming me. At this moment, I was not only afraid of him, but of myself. Afraid that I would become a part of his horror story. And just like that, the following nights, I couldn't stop thinking about him. A strange connection, a mysterious curse. There was definitely something wrong, but I couldn't give up my curiosity. I began to feel an inexplicable change in the air. My apartment, where I once felt safe and relaxed, now felt heavy, as if every wall was waiting for something terrible to happen. Every night, when the steady sound of rain falls and the wind blows strongly through the window, I can't stop worrying about that man. But the strange thing is, I can't get rid of my curiosity. I seemed to be caught in a vortex of fear and wanted to understand that cigar-smoking man better. One night, I decided to try something daring. I couldn't let his presence haunt me anymore. I wondered if I could face him, see him more clearly, understand the truth behind that dark shadow. So, I stood up and walked towards the window. Even though the atmosphere was heavy, I still couldn't get rid of that strange feeling. That night, I felt more than just an observation from him, but as if something supernatural was following me. When I looked at the opposite balcony, he appeared again, as always. But this time, there is a distinct difference. I could see his face clearly through the window, no longer just a faint silhouette. His eyes, although seemingly calm, contained a strange light, as if they were penetrating my every thought. A cold feeling rose from the bottom of my heart, making it impossible for me to breathe. Just in that moment, I felt like he was entering my space, like he was right next to me. Suddenly, I heard a very small sound, like a whisper, spreading from the room. It was a very weak voice, as if something was trying to communicate with me. I looked around in panic, but there was no one in the room except me. I quickly turned back to the window, but the man was no longer standing there. Only darkness and a haunting silence remained. At this point, I don't know if I'm dreaming or not. But one thing I know is, his appearance was not a coincidence. The following nights became more strange. Not only did the cigar-smoking man appear at 3:14 a.m., but now, every time he arrived, everything around me began to change. Objects in my apartment seemed to move on their own. Antique clocks were tapped lightly and the wooden items I restored seemed to make a slight hiss, like they were trying to escape from my hands. I feel like I'm stuck in a nightmare that I can't wake up from. One night I decided to wait, without sleep, to see if anything different would happen. And just as I predicted, at 3:14 a.m., he appeared again. But this time, he did not stand motionless like usual. Instead, he moved slowly, as if preparing for something terrifying. The red light from the cigarette lit up in the darkness, and suddenly, he turned to look at me. A cold feeling filled me. I clearly felt that he knew I was looking at him. Something changed in his eyes. It was no longer a casual observation but as if he was conveying a message. A feeling of horror rose within me. I couldn't take my eyes off him, even though I wanted to. And then, suddenly, I heard a strange sound, a thudding noise like someone stepping lightly across the floor. My heart was pounding in my chest, uncontrollably. I turned around, only to see darkness surrounding me and something seemingly watching me from a hidden corner. The next day, I decided to learn about that man. I went online and tried to find all the information related to the building I was living in. And then, a strange thing happened. An old article from the 1960s appeared. In that article, there was a story about a man who used to live in the very apartment across from me. The story describes that he was a cigar addict, and one rainy night, he mysteriously disappeared, no one knows the reason. Investigators did not find any traces. But, the strange thing is, every year, at exactly 3:14 a.m., a figure identical to him appears in that apartment. The truth is gradually revealed. I was not only faced with a man obsessed with cigars, but also an inescapable soul, still wandering in this world, unable to find peace. And I, accidentally became the next person in his story. A feeling of fear and helplessness overwhelmed me. I know that every night, when the rain falls again and the wind blows through the window, he will return. But can I find a way to escape this spirit's harassment? At first, I didn't think much about it. Simply another insomniac, seeking comfort from a cigar and the stillness of the night air. But when the smoke started moving purposefully, I couldn't help but notice. It began to curl up, forming a strange, zigzag tendril that stretched impossibly toward my open window. My heart suddenly beat faster, as I witnessed impossible physical things happening before my eyes. No way, smoke could never fly like that. But it still flies, hovers, in a certain direction, without wavering even a bit. The smoke from that cigarette drifted into my workspace, gently passing over the table I was repairing. And then, the strangest thing happened. To my surprise, the smoke began to form a clear shape, a hand. The smoky finger reached out, pointing to a section of veneer I had repaired that evening. I stared in shock, unable to believe my eyes. The hole was small, almost invisible to the naked eye, but clearly visible in the hazy space of the smoke. It was a subtle aberration, as if a perfect link in time was missing in the work I was doing. The smoke seemed to understand that better than me. It didn't just point out my flaws, it was as if there was a connection, something I couldn't explain. I felt my skin rise, shivering at this strange sensation. A moment of oppressive silence spread throughout the room. The mixed feeling of fear and confusion made me unable to tear myself away from that look. I turned back to look at the veneer, trying to find my composure. But I can't do it. I see more clearly than ever the tiny hole in the wooden structure. Only a master craftsman could see it, and clearly, even though I didn't want to admit it, I knew that entity, that shadow, had seen it before me. That night, I continued working, my hands shaking as I tried to fix the defect I had just discovered. But I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, monitored from a far distance. It felt like that man was still there, out there, watching my every move, never taking his eyes off me. The more I fix it, the more I feel like I'm losing control. But the strange thing was, when I finished my work and looked up through the window, I saw the smoky hand appear again. This time, it made a gesture of approval. A thumbs up, as if praising me for getting the job done. That gesture was so real, I couldn't help but laugh dryly in fear. My laughter rang out, not happily, but a crazy laugh, as if I could no longer control myself. From then on, it became our nightly ritual. I would work, and he, the cigar-smoking man, would appear precisely at 3:14 a.m., at that exact moment, when the night was still thick. Smoke would appear, pointing out flaws that my eyes couldn't see. I fix them, as much as I can, as if I'm living in a game I'm not even a part of. The items I restored began to sell at high prices. Customers constantly praised the perfection in every detail. What I thought were old, primitive items have now become expensive works of art. I began to feel like a true artist, perfecting my work beyond reproach. I have to be grateful to him, right? The person who helped me become a more perfect worker than ever. But the truth is, I can't take it anymore. Even though I didn't say it out loud, I felt that every night, that man's presence became more and more strange. The perfect details of my work became a burden. I couldn't escape his cold gaze through the smoke, feeling like I was under constant surveillance. More and more, I don't feel like I'm in control of my work anymore. Everything felt like it was being pushed too far, like I was doing something that didn't belong to me. And now, I no longer feel proud. I just feel scared. During the following nights, I felt something change in my apartment. The wooden objects, the items I restored, now bring not only a sense of pride but also an obsession. It seemed like every time I finished an item, it took with it a piece of the other man's supervision. These objects were no longer just furniture, they seemed to have a life of their own, as if controlled by an entity beyond my control. One night, while I was repairing a chair, I suddenly heard a noise from behind, as soft as a breath. Turning around, I saw that the chair, completed, seemed to be slowly moving. A cold feeling enveloped me, and I knew I couldn't escape his presence. The man's silhouette, along with the hazy smoke, still constantly haunts me. My sleep became more and more interrupted, a series of sleepless nights with no beginning or end. A feeling of exhaustion took over me, making every step become blurry, as if I were walking in a sleepwalk, no longer alert to distinguish what was real and what was a dream. I found myself jumping into the darkness, entering a threatening space, and was filled with the characteristic smell of cigarettes. That strong smell of smoke penetrated every cell in my body, making it impossible for me to stop. I seek to explain everything with reason. I researched the building opposite, but the results were nothing unusual. Just a luxurious, modern high-rise building, with no reports of strange phenomena. Still, I couldn't stop that feeling of insecurity. I decided to ask my neighbor across the street if she had noticed anything strange. She looked at me strangely, as if I had just said something unbelievable. Then she answered, her voice cold and indifferent, "The 12th floor of that building is not an apartment, there is no balcony. Just an empty space containing the building's HVAC system." I thought that was a superficial answer, maybe she didn't fully understand what I was going through. I pointed outside the window, showing her the balcony opposite. But when we looked back, there was nothing left. There was just an empty wall of glass and concrete, with no sign of a balcony or a smoking man. She suggested unkindly that perhaps I needed more sleep. I nodded absent-mindedly, but in my heart I knew that what I had seen, what I continued to see every night, could not be explained rationally. With each passing night, the smoking man became more and more demanding. The smoky hands did not simply point out flaws, they began to make assertive gestures. Sometimes, if I don't follow their instructions, they will take away my tools, making it impossible for me to continue my work. My work gradually became beyond my own understanding, and it seemed I was starting to apply techniques I had never learned, techniques I did not understand. Each work I complete has a strange perfection, to the point where I no longer feel it is mine. The items I restored turned out to be incredibly wonderful, but also terrifying, as if a force beyond my control was behind everything. Last week, the smoke began to linger longer after each edit, lingering in my living space. I wake up between naps, my eyes closed from exhaustion, and find that smoke hovering around my family photos, or sweeping across my precious collection of antique woodworking tools that I always keep. A cold and anxious feeling filled me. My grandfather's hand plane, a family heirloom that I have always kept like a treasure, began to vibrate slightly every time the smoke passed by. As if it also sensed something was wrong. The temperature in my apartment dropped abnormally, despite the sweltering summer outside. Every time the smoke passed by, my breath seemed to freeze in the air, cold as if I were living in a dark realm, separate from the real world. To combat this feeling, I started taking sleeping pills, hoping to escape the cycle of 3:14 a.m. obsessions. But the pills don't do anything. No matter how strong the sedative I took, I still woke up at that moment. I was drawn irresistibly to the window. The smoking man still stood there, like every night, waiting for me, watching me. His gaze was empty, reflecting nothing, as if he were not a person, but an invisible entity, existing outside of space and time. Yesterday, I decided to end this strange relationship. When the smoky hand appeared again and pointed to a small defect on the Chip and Dale chair I was repairing, I deliberately turned away, not wanting to look at it anymore. I focused on another part of the chair, one that didn't need editing, hoping that would make it impossible for the smoke to examine it. My defiance hung between us, a tangible thing. The smoke stopped in the middle of the pointing gesture and then withdrew slightly, as if it was surprised by my action. Something in the air became tense. I could feel the anger, the discomfort from the other side, from something I couldn't name. And I know that this time, things won't be the same as before. What will happen next? Part of me was scared, part of me was curious. I know, if I continue to challenge, things can go further, with no return. But what would have happened if I had just continued to follow that man's instructions? I'm standing at a crossroads where there's no turning back. A bizarre choice between fear and freedom. A low rattling sound rang out from the space between our buildings. The sound was unclear, not a laugh, not a cough, but like something very ancient, dry, like long-forgotten pages of a book, turned over and over again in a deserted, quiet library. In that moment, I couldn't identify the source of the sound, but it seemed to permeate the air, filling the space around me. The smoking man, as if oblivious to my presence, took a long drag from his cigar, his sunken cheeks deepening with each effort, each puff. The cherry gave off a dim light, a strange light, making his bony face look monstrous, as if the life within him was gradually fading away. Even though he was just a dark figure in the dark night, there was something in that light that I couldn't get rid of. And then, what I saw next made my hands shake so much that I couldn't hold the recovery tools anymore. The smoke did not form a hand like usual. It was not just simple smoke, but it rolled up in a continuous stream, as if controlled by some invisible force. That smoke poured through my room window, constantly flowing in like a thick fog, penetrating my space. It carried not only the usual smell of cigarettes but also an eerie smell, of burning wood, of scorched varnish, and even, underneath it all, the unmistakable metallic scent of blood. That smell spread throughout the room, making the atmosphere heavier and gloomier than ever. It felt like I was surrounded by something dark, unable to escape. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body seemed frozen in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The smoke gradually condensed, solidifying into 3 separate figures, each identical to the smoking man. They have no sense of vitality, no naturalness of a real person. The 3 smoke structures were all gaunt and ancient, like perfect replicas of him. They stood there, passively, watching me from a hidden corner that I couldn't see, but I clearly felt their presence. They moved with jerky, unnatural movements, as if each of their movements was controlled from another source of power. These ghosts of smoke flew around my desk, past the furniture I was restoring, and I felt like the space around me was shaking, as if the whole room was being pushed into another dimension, where my time was no longer there. Their feet don't make any noise on my hardwood floors. But when their knuckles touched the chair I was repairing, the impact was very strong, very terrible. Their shadowy fingers pressed, uncompromisingly. Each strike was like a thunderbolt, cracks breaking out in the wood, stretching vertically like lightning. The centuries-old mahogany, which I had spent months restoring, was now systematically, mercilessly destroyed. I stood and watched, my eyes wide open, but my throat was choked with a scream that I couldn't let out. Every muscle in my body seemed to freeze, my limbs became immobile from deep terror. This feeling, like I can't react, can't run away, can't do anything. I could only stand there, helpless, witnessing the destruction of the very project I had devoted so much of my heart to. These 3 smoke characters operate like machines, in unbelievably perfect synchronization. Their every touch on the furniture brings destruction. Every part, every detail is broken in the same way. They moved from one chair to the other items in my workshop, as if carrying out some task I couldn't understand. There was no sound, just endless destruction. Every time the smoky hand touched me, I saw my work disintegrate, each item destroyed as if manipulated by a mysterious power. This nightmare has no end. What I saw was no longer a dream, but a terrifying truth that I couldn't deny. I began to feel as if I, too, were erased from this world, as if I were part of some invisible force, unable to escape. The splinters along the grain of the wood began to form strange symbols. I felt like I almost recognized them, but couldn't understand them. My rational mind was struggling with what I was seeing. Each image, each piece of wood seemed to be writing a language that I couldn't decipher. I desperately clung to rational explanations, hoping this was just a hallucination, or maybe I was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning from the appliances in the apartment. But I cannot deny that what I saw was not something that could be explained by conventional scientific theories. Only when 3 smoke figures approached my grandfather's desk did I suddenly realize something strange. A small detail that I had never noticed before. In that moment, a wave of despair overtook me, and I lunged forward, swinging wildly at the nearest figure. My hand passed over it, but I didn't feel a fuzzy feeling like when I touched the smoke. Instead, the feeling I got was that it was made of something solid, something more substantial than the smoke that created it. But my movements seemed to have broken any impact on them. The 3 shapes stopped, 3 identical faces turned towards me with slightly surprised expressions. I felt like I had just committed something irreversible, and in that moment of confusion, I staggered to the window, desperately facing the original smoking man. What I saw, or rather didn't see, made my blood freeze. My heart stopped beating when I realized the truth. No balcony. There are no apartments. There was only a blank glass wall, reflecting the city lights below and, more terrifyingly, my own pale, frightened face. I collapsed onto the windowsill, my consciousness starting to peel away like cheap thread. Behind me, those three figures continued to methodically destroy and knock each piece of furniture in my collection. Each knock felt like a slash to my existence. I couldn't react, couldn't escape. An extreme despair filled me. The feeling that everything was beyond my control, that I was completely caught up in this game and couldn't turn back. Closing my eyes, I tried to calm myself, remind myself that none of this was real. That I was having a psychological breakdown, that I would soon wake up in the hospital and the doctors would explain that I was too stressed from overwork and lack of sleep. But as soon as I thought that, a gentle but firm pressure was placed on my shoulder, making it impossible for me not to open my eyes. And when I opened my eyes, I saw the smoking man standing in front of me, his face just inches from mine. This close, I could clearly see that the eyes I thought were eyes were actually just empty, bottomless, ancient sockets. I couldn't take my eyes off them. He extended his hand towards me, as if offering something. My grandfather's wooden plane, the wood now carved with symbols similar to the patterns I had engraved on my destroyed furniture. The smoke creature pressed the plane into my hand. It felt so warm and solid that I couldn't help but grasp the familiar handle. My fingers grasped it tightly, and in that moment, images flooded my mind. Workshops throughout history. Craftsmen, master laborers, always worked under the supervision of the smoking man. Every piece they create is unbelievably perfect, and each person eventually faces the same choice I am currently facing. Then I suddenly understood that this was not just a game, but a challenge. A deal I couldn't refuse, and above all, a new beginning. That was last night. I haven't slept yet. Instead, I spent hours restoring damaged furniture. My fingers moved with precision and insight, even though I knew it was not entirely my own knowledge. The techniques I am applying seem to no longer exist in my time, but are techniques that have long since disappeared, from the master craftsmen of centuries past. Each mark I made on the wood seemed to come to life, carrying a subtle power, making the morning light shining on the symbols I was carving more sparkling than ever. Now, there are only 12 hours left until the smoking man appears again. 12 hours for me to decide. Do I accept this dark apprenticeship, continue in this cycle, or do I run away from this apartment and abandon all woodworking tools forever? My grandfather's plane now sits next to me, the symbols on its handle vibrating gently to the beat of my heartbeat. I could almost hear it whispering, promising secrets of craftsmanship far beyond human understanding, things I had never dared to imagine. If only I were willing to pay the price. Whatever I decide, I know one thing with absolute certainty: perfection requires sacrifice. Will the cigar-smoking man wait at 3:14 a.m. to see if I have a balcony for him to stand on, or will I choose to give it all up? A challenge, a grim choice, awaits me, and I cannot avoid it any longer. I know I will have to face the price. But do I have the courage to accept, or will I turn my back on what I have dreamed of? Even in the light of day, the old Victorian house felt wrong, as if the walls themselves were watching me, measuring my worth by the silent judgment of past generations. The wooden floor creaked under my weight. But it was not the familiar welcoming groan of settled wood, but a deliberate complaint, as if something had been disturbed after a long sleep. I told myself these were the normal sounds of an old house, that the longer-than-usual shadows were just an illusion of light coming through the warped windows. I was wrong. I bought the property from my distant relatives who wanted nothing to do with Malcolm's grandfather's estate after his death. They practically gave it away, only mentioning in passing a certain obsession the old man had for his craft. Malcolm Redfield was a master carpenter, creating works that museums today still display behind glass. His reputation for perfectionism was legendary. One time, he burned the entire dining table set because one chair leg was a quarter-inch too short. No one can notice. But he did. The house has his workshop in the basement and tools accumulated over the years. This inheritance is to me a perfect gift. I was running my small furniture restoration business out of a cramped garage, and the space had room to expand. I grew up hearing stories about my grandfather's special skills, even though I only met him once as a child. I remember him as a tall, serious man with hands like old oak trees and eyes that seemed to measure everything they saw. My first 3 days in this house were spent cleaning and organizing. I swept away decades of dust, arranged my tools next to my desk, and placed it beneath a high basement window. Late Wednesday afternoon, I prepared the site for my first project, restoring an antique writing desk for a client in Boston. I worked until nightfall, lost in the familiar rhythm of sanding and scraping. It was almost midnight when I turned off the basement lights and climbed the stairs to the second floor, where I had set up my bedroom. Exhaustion weighed heavily on my limbs, but satisfaction still flowed through me. Tomorrow I will start applying the first coat of polish. That night marked the beginning. I was drifting off to sleep when a floorboard creaked in the hallway. My eyes suddenly opened wide, my heart pounded. The sound came again, the footsteps moving deliberately, slowly and methodically, as if someone was approaching. I lay paralyzed, my throat tight as I looked at the empty space below the door. A shadow passed by, too tall, too narrow to be human, blocking the faint moonlight from the hallway window. Then another and another. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe as sweat soaked the bed sheets. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the breath I exhaled suddenly appeared in pale clouds. Everything in the room became quiet, only that strange sound was getting closer and closer, as if someone was moving in the house. I tried not to let myself be afraid, but anxiety gradually increased, feeling like someone was watching me, monitoring my every move. Through the wall, I heard something being dragged across the floor of the next room, followed by faint scratching sounds like sandpaper on wood. By morning, I convinced myself it was just a dream, lack of sleep combined with the stress of traveling. A reasonable explanation. I laughed at my midnight fears while making coffee, although the laughter died down when I noticed new sawdust on the kitchen floor that I hadn't tracked down. The feeling of insecurity returned once again, as if there was something unfinished in this house. Traces of my grandfather are still present somewhere in every item, every hidden corner of the house. The perfection he pursued has now become something alive, an obsession, a reminder that perfection does not always come with peace. That evening, I installed motion-sensing cameras throughout the house, hoping technology could provide logical answers while imagination provided supernatural ones. One in the hallway, one at the top of the basement stairs, and another in the workshop. Each camera is like a safety measure, a way to control everything around me. But I also know, if there really is something strange, nothing can be explained by these cameras. Anyway, I worked late, meticulously applying the first coat of varnish to the writing desk. A foul smell filled the basement, a sharp chemical smell mingling with the aged feel of the wood and metal. I must have fallen asleep at my desk because I suddenly woke up at 2:17 a.m. The clock on the table indicated something that was bothering me, a noise from upstairs. Standing up from the chair, my muscles stiff and sore, I walked towards the basement stairs, filled with restlessness. The motion-activated lights should have been flashing, but the stairs remained dark. I groped for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam caught something moving at the top of the stairs, a tall figure retreating into the darkness too quickly for me to make out the details. But only the impression of unnatural height and thinness remains. My heart was filled with vague fear. "Who's there?" My voice sounded thin and scared, echoing off the stone walls, as if it didn't belong to me. There was no response, but through cracks in the floorboards above, I saw dancing lights moving throughout the house. Warm golden light like old lanterns carried from room to room. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, my body unable to react, but my mind trying to process what I was seeing. Finally, I forced myself to climb the stairs. Every step required conscious effort, as if I was resisting an invisible force that wanted to pull me back. The house was empty, dark and silent when I walked out. There were no lanterns, no silhouettes, just the nagging feeling of being watched from behind. An indescribable feeling, like there was something very close, but impossible to touch. The next morning, I checked the camera. My hands were shaking as I connected the laptop and opened the video files. The first two show nothing. The hallway was deserted all night, the basement stairs were undisturbed, but the camera in the workshop activated 3 times. With growing fear, I clicked on the first video file. My own face filled the screen. My eyes rolled back, only the whites showing, my mouth slightly open, panting hard. The camera angle was wrong, as if I was hugging myself, pointing at my face from below. The timestamp displayed is 2:23 a.m. I watched in horror as I was recorded, staring for 30 seconds before the video ended. The second clip, timestamped as 3:15 a.m., shows the same unbelievable image. My face, but not my face. Something draped over my features like an ill-fitting mask. The breathing was different now, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone sawing hardwood. The third clip, I couldn't watch at all. My face appeared closer to the lens, my mouth curled into a smile that a human mouth shouldn't have, my eyes still rolled back. A thin, stained hand, not mine, reached from behind my head and slowly covered the lens. I sat back, my stomach grumbling with nausea, sweat dripping down my forehead despite the chilly morning. The cameras, which were supposed to provide answers, now only deepened the mystery. I moved all day in a fog, unable to concentrate on work, my mind confused with unanswered questions. Am I caught in a loop? Or is there something worse lurking in this house itself? The images on the screen were just the beginning of things I couldn't understand. The half-varnished writing desk was forgotten in a corner of the workshop. A strong odor began to permeate the air, an indescribable smell. I realized it was new varnish, but it was stronger and more durable than the paint I had applied to the table. And it wasn't just the writing desk, but something else, like paint from upstairs. They mixed together, as if there was something wrong hidden in this house itself. I followed the scent, which led me to the narrow door at the end of the hallway, the entrance to the attic. I've never been up there. I thought it was just a space to store the previous owner's belongings, nothing important. But the scent got stronger as I approached the door. My hand trembled as I touched the door knob, my lungs struggled to breathe. I told myself I was being unreasonable. Maybe just a reasonable explanation, maybe an unopened can of product from my grandfather's time, eventually disturbed by the vibrations of my work downstairs. But when I tried to open the door, I couldn't. That feeling, it made me step back, unable to open it myself. Then I don't open the door. Instead, I went back to the basement, threw myself into work, and tried to ignore the feeling of more and more eyes watching my back. I made mistakes that I would never have accepted before. The sanding was uneven, the varnish was too thick, but I couldn't concentrate. My grandfather's tools hung on the wall, and looking at the perfectly arranged chisels, planes, and saws seemed to be judging my poor skills. It felt like they were looking at me, laughing at my shortcomings, and there was nothing I could do about it. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, listening to each creak. The groans of the house seemed to subside. Around 3 a.m., the power suddenly went out. Darkness fell like a shroud, immediate and absolute. I groped for my phone, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to explode out of my chest. That's when they arrived. Tall shapes moved in the darkness, almost indistinguishable from the darkness except for their unnatural height and thinness. I caught a glimpse of them passing by the window, elongated silhouettes illuminated by the moonlight, carrying what looked like old-fashioned woodworking tools. The air was filled with whispers too weak to be heard, but they carried a tone of disappointment, as if they were whispering regrets, things not yet accomplished. I stood still in place, my body unable to move, just listening, until dawn broke, when those figures slowly receded into the darkness. The power came back suddenly, as if it had never been broken. The lights came back on, blinding me for a moment. I sat down, unable to believe what I had just witnessed. Last night, everything felt like it was out of my control. It feels like something ancient and haunting is returning to this house, and I'm just an outsider who can't stop looking at the unexplainable. The next morning, I spent the morning in town at a coffee shop, using their Wi-Fi to research the house's history. I searched for all the information I could about my grandfather and this house. Local news archives revealed things my relatives didn't tell me. My grandfather did not pass away peacefully in his sleep as I had believed. In fact, he died in a strange accident, one that no one could explain. But the strange thing is, no one said clearly the reason, only that he worked in his wood workshop until his last days. The stories I heard about him no longer seemed true. All the things I once believed in now seemed like disconnected pieces of a larger picture, a picture I couldn't understand. The figures in the dark are not random. And the hauntings from my grandfather's past seemed to be drawing me into a chain of events that I couldn't stop. Malcolm Redfield was found in his workshop, slumped over an unfinished work. The coroner concluded the cause was natural, but locals whispered about his unbridled obsession with perfection. Apprentices were rumored to have lived with him for many years, scrawny young men, eager to learn from the master carpenter, but ultimately abandoned by the strict standards he set. Some people haven't left yet, according to rumors. These people, although physically gone, their presence, their obsession with perfection, are still like ghosts lingering in this house. I returned home in the afternoon, determined to face whatever was waiting for me in the attic. The smell of varnish now filled the air, seeping from under the attic door and spreading throughout the entire second floor. That scent, strong, like an irresistible call. My mouth was dry as I approached, my legs felt like they were about to give out. I felt the presence of something, invisible but very clear, as if it was observing me, following me. My hand turned the door knob easily, and the door opened on silent hinges. Dust particles danced in the rays of sunlight through the small window. The attic stretched longer than I imagined, filled with upholstered furniture and stacked wooden crates. The floorboards were dusty, undisturbed, except for a perfect circle of shoe prints surrounding my toolbox, which sat in the middle of the room, even though I'd never brought it up here. The handprints were deep in the dust, as if they had been made by men standing in place for hours, looking down at my tools, assessing them and finding them lacking. The precise, methodical circle is a ritual of assessment, one that I cannot understand. Slowly, I approached, breathing shallow in the hot, heavy air. The toolbox was open, my tools organized with a precision I had never used before. Each chisel, saw and plane is positioned according to size and function. But they are not alone. Among them are older tools, antique pieces with dark wood handles polished by decades of use. Their metallic surface sparkles despite their age. A set of my grandfather's personal tools that I never found among his possessions. Those were the items he used every day, the tools that followed him throughout his life. A leather-bound diary sits at the top. I've never seen it before. It was not brought up here. With trembling fingers, I opened the cover and saw my grandfather's angular handwriting filling the pages. Diary entries span decades, detailing his pursuit of perfection in woodworking. In the early pages, his writings are measured and instructive, but they gradually become haunting and intense over the years. The last entry, written just before his death, left me frozen. The words cut like knives into my mind, they watch me work. They have always watched. I have tried to meet their standards for the past 60 years. The order accepts only perfection, and perfection cannot be achieved with mere mortal hands. They give guidance to those who deserve their attention. I have been found wanting. Maybe my nephew will do better. The tools will be turned over to him. The guild will be watching. As I read those last words, I felt their presence behind me. Tall, thin figures, unimaginable in old clothes, smelling of sawdust and varnish. I didn't need to turn around to know they were there, standing in their circle, waiting to judge my work, my worthiness. An extreme fear filled me, feeling like I was being watched over by the spirits of former craftsmen who never finished their work, and now they were just waiting for me to end the cycle. Only then did I understand that my grandfather was not crazy. Guilds are real. Ancient craftsmen, who overcame death through their unwavering devotion to perfect woodworking, continue to watch and judge those who follow their craft. They evaluated my grandfather for decades, realizing that he was lacking somewhere in his work. And now, they will judge me. I haven't left home yet. I cannot. Hoy watched me work every night, quietly and patiently. Their silent presence is both intimidating and instructive. Invisible hands moved my tools when I wasn't looking, adjusting my measurements, leaving behind examples of woodwork so perfect it brought tears to my eyes. Sometimes I find my own hands moving in ways I've never learned, as if I'm being guided by an invisible force, to achieve greater, more perfect precision. The camera still only recorded my face, my empty eyes, my mouth moving and saying words I didn't remember. I stopped checking the footage, even though I knew what I saw and there wasn't me anymore. My work is improving. The desk is finished. More beautiful than anything I've created before. Now I have started sitting in a rocking chair, using techniques I knew about but had never researched. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I notice that my face has changed, it's gotten bigger, my fingers have gotten longer. I stand straighter and taller at night. I found myself moving through the house, carrying an antique lantern I didn't remember buying, examining the woodwork with a critical eye, as if I had become part of the carpenter ghosts who were quietly guiding me from behind. Now I understand why my grandfather never left. Why did he push himself to impossible standards of workmanship? The society demands perfection and they have a long time to wait for it. The silhouettes of the carpenters never stop. Sometimes I wonder how many other people they've recruited over the centuries, how many workshops they've haunted with their exacting standards. I also wonder how soon I will join their circle forever, becoming one of the towering, unimaginable figures who judge the next generation of carpenters in the endless night. I am no longer afraid. I was just determined to create something perfect, to earn a place in the guild. After all, it's in my blood. I was a part of this, whether I wanted it or not. The whispering started in the wire 3 months ago. It found me through forgotten circuits, copper circuits that carried voices from somewhere that wasn't quite here. Now I know that phones are never just collectibles. They are waiting patiently for the sentinels, until the right frequency finds them. And finally, they found me. My name is Robert James Caldwell. No one has called me that since my birth certificate was filed decades ago. I call myself Rob, just Rob. The voice on the phone knew better, they knew my name, they knew who I was, and they knew what I was going to do next. The basement echoed with the soft electric hum of my collection. 37 rotary phones from the 1960s were meticulously restored and mounted on a custom console I built against the far wall. These phones are not simply ancient objects, they are portals between me and them, the deceased carpenters who found me through forgotten frequencies. They were waiting for me to follow in their footsteps, and I knew I couldn't refuse. Lightly toasted black, creamy resin, avocado green, harvest yellow, cherry red. Each phone was collected from estate sales, antique stores, and forgotten storage units across 3 states. These items, seemingly just old objects, have become my obsession. The obsession started innocently after I inherited my grandfather's Western electric car model. The sturdy weight of the receiver, the satisfying mechanical sturdiness of the rotary dial, the tangible connections to the simpler analog era, all gave me an eerie feeling, as if I were grasping at some forgotten part of the past. I always pay special attention to my workspace. The phones are arranged chronologically, by date of manufacture, each connected to a central junction box of my own design. Despite the fact that they don't function as phones in any sense, I can't resist the satisfaction of seeing them connected, as a nod to authenticity. That's what makes me feel satisfied with the sense of order, that everything has a place, a reason for being. The electrical work was minimal, just enough to power the small light bulbs I installed in the phone models, illuminating their transparent dials. They don't really need to be active, but I love seeing them glow. Every little detail, even a bright spot in the night, gives me a sense of peace, as if I've completed a piece of work that no one else could. The first call came in at exactly 3:33 a.m. I know because there I was, half asleep on the workshop bench, finishing the restoration of a 1963 Northern Electric streetcar. Suddenly, a powerful sound broke the silence like breaking glass. Not the cheerful, nostalgic chime you might imagine, but a shrill, urgent alarm that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My hand jerked so hard that the small screwdriver clattered on the cement floor. 7 phones rang at the same time, their rings in unbelievably perfect sync. I stood frozen, watching them continue, my mind racing with explanations. Each bell rang like a slap to my mind, making me unable to believe what was happening. These phones are not connected to any active lines. They cannot call. However, they did it. And they weren't just calling, they were calling my name. When I finally picked up the receiver of the middle phone, the black Western Electric 500 model, the static washed over me like a stream of cold water. The crackling white noise seemed to hold patterns beyond my comprehension, like hearing an underwater conversation, vague and dreamy, but with an undeniable weight. The voice turned into a deep, resonant yet hollow voice, as if speaking from the bottom of a well, from a place I couldn't reach. Robert James Caldwell, it said, my full legal name falling from invisible lips with startling precision. You will mark your presence. Dial 33. My throat tightened, blood rushing to my temples. No one calls me Robert James. No one. It's a name that I buried a long time ago, a name that I don't want to remember. I slammed the receiver down, my hands trembled, I couldn't control myself, cold sweat reached the roots of my hair. Couldn't sleep that night. I paced the main floor of the house, checking the locks, peering through the windows into the impenetrable darkness beyond. The rationality in me suggested that it was a joke, some elaborate hoax. But inside I knew, there was no reason to explain this. Old phones, vague and strange calls from an unidentifiable place. Are they signals from another world, or just my obsession starting to infiltrate reality? Unanswered questions still make me unable to calm down, unable to escape the fear that is gradually covering me. But there is something deeper, some primal instinct that knows better. Finally, as dawn broke, I convinced myself that I had dreamed the whole thing. A hallucination born from too many late nights and too much loneliness. But then, I walked into the kitchen and saw every piece of silverware transformed into unimaginable shapes. The metal warped as if it had melted and deformed. Forks, spoons, knives, all deformed into useless spiral sculptures. I stood among the piles of ruined cutlery, my heart pounding in my ribs, the taste of copper filling my mouth. That's just the beginning. The next night, I disconnected every phone, unplugged my creations, and removed the little light bulbs that illuminated their dials. I even turned off the circuit breaker in the entire basement. At exactly 3:33 a.m., I woke up and looked at the digital clock next to my bed, half convinced that I had imagined the whole thing. A distant bell rang through the floorboards, a muffled but unmistakable call from below. In the basement, lit only by the narrow beam of a flashlight, 7 phones rang simultaneously. 7 numbers as before. No power, no connections, not even complete internal mechanisms in some cases. However, they still echoed with persistent mechanical voices. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, and went out as I approached the wall of phones. In the perfect darkness, the bell seemed to take physical form, vibrating through my bones. I groped for the stethoscope, my fingertips numb with fear. Same noise, same voice, same command. Dial 33. This time I hung up immediately. My hands shook so much that I dropped the flashlight and heard it roll across the concrete floor. I ran upstairs, locked the basement door behind me, pressed my back against it as if wanting to keep something there. Sleep finally came, just before dawn, a fitful drowsiness instead of true rest. By morning, every mirror in my house had spiderweb cracks radiating from the center points like frozen explosions. I threw away all my battered silverware, bought new cutlery, and spent my days researching electromagnetic phenomena, pirate radio signals, and even the previous owners of my century-old house. I don't see any point, just ghost stories and pseudoscience. That night, I took more drastic measures. I turned off the main power to the entire house and sat in the dark living room, baseball bat across my knees, eyes glued to the basement door. My watch, a time analog that belonged to my father, ticked steadily at 3:33 a.m. My mouth was dry, my shirt was damp from cold sweat even though the air was cool. At the appointed time, silence is held. A minute passed. 2. I began to relax, letting out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then a phone rang. Not from the basement, but from upstairs in my bedroom. A phone that shouldn't exist. I took the stairs twice. There, on my nightstand, sat a rotary phone that I had never seen before. An antique cream model, its curly cord stuck in the darkness below my bed. It rang with authority, each strike of the bell seemed to vibrate the air. The rational part of my mind shut down completely. I answered it. Robert James Caldwell, the voice began, now familiar in its otherworldly resonance. Your resistance is noted and rejected. Dial 33. I hung up without speaking and spent the night in the car, parked in the bright lights of the 24-hour supermarket, my breath fogging the windows as I watched the sun rise through bloody eyes. Over the following weeks, I tried everything. I stayed in hotels. The phones found me, appearing in rooms that had only the main card for entry. I visited friends who worked as home renovation advocates. Their silverware twisted overnight, their mirrors twisted. Crack. I consulted electricians, paranormal researchers, even a priest. No one can help. Most thought I was suffering from delusions. I destroyed my collection, methodically smashing each phone with a hammer, burning the remains in a bonfire behind my house, drawing concerned looks from neighbors. That night, in a sterile hotel room 40 meters from home, a black rotary phone appeared on the table while I showered. I answered and hung up immediately. In the morning, the hotel manager pounded on my door, demanding I pay for the destruction of the property. Every piece of metal in the room, from the shower curtain rod to the bed frame, had buckled and twisted overnight. Finally, I gave in. Standing in front of my rebuilt phone console, because somehow, incredibly, every phone had reappeared, fully restored, I raised the Western 500's receiver at exactly 3:33 a.m. The line is dead. Nothing happened. I slept clearly that night for the first time in weeks. No twisted silverware, no cracked mirrors. For the next 3 days, I followed the nightly ritual, answering at 3:33 a.m., dialing 33 and being rewarded with lucky normalcy during the day. On the fourth night, the voice changed its message. Robert James Caldwell. Satisfactory compliance. Phase 2 begins. Before I could answer, a sound filled the receiver. A wet pulse that takes a few seconds to determine. My own heartbeat amplified and played back to me. Every valve and chamber sits in my ear. Beneath it, almost subliminally, the voice whispered, "Today we will synchronize your bones with the signal." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The receiver dangled by its cord, the heartbeat sound growing louder and louder until it seemed to fill the room, matching the pace with my racing pulse. Each beat echoed through the basement, vibrating through the concrete floor into the soles of my feet. For hours, I huddled in the farthest corner from the phone, hands pressing uselessly against my ears, feeling the sound in my teeth, in my joints, behind my eyes. Just before dawn, it stopped. Silence hit me like a physical wave. I didn't wait to see what the morning would bring. I packed a bag and drove, putting miles between me and that house, that basement, those phones. I drove until my vision blurred, stopping only when sheer exhaustion required me to stop at a remote roadside motel that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Room 17. Smell of old cigarettes and chemical air freshener. I collapsed onto the bed without undressing, sleep claiming me at once, as if all the exhaustion and fear had been bottled up inside me. Dreams come from wires growing beneath my skin, rotating dials replacing my eyes, a vast switchboard where each connection controls the movements of my limbs. I couldn't differentiate between reality and dreams, feeling like I was being controlled, moving step by step according to a plan that didn't belong to me. I woke up to a familiar sound. The bedside lamp illuminated a green rotary phone that I hadn't noticed before. The clock on the bedside read 3:33 a.m., now had become a time of the unexplainable. I answered without hesitation, as if a part of me had accepted its presence, had accepted that I couldn't escape. Surrender makes my movements smooth despite my terror. Phase 2 progress, the voice informed me. Bone conductivity at 30%, remains to be calibrated. A humming noise started, not in the receiver, but in my skull. This feeling is like a stream of energy spreading from inside the body, through each joint. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe as the vibration spread through my ribs, my shoulders, down my arms to reach my fingertips. I felt them then, as if someone were adjusting the microscope in my bone structure. Minor restructuring of cartilage and bone. Not exactly painful, but deeply wrong, like feeling the location of your internal organs change. The voice continued speaking, but not through the phone. It resonated directly in my head, traveling through bones rather than air. The yearbook synchronized as expected. You are an excellent conductor, Robert James Caldwell. The words triggered a series of images in my head, a series of surreal memories. Other collectors, other basements, other phones. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of them across the country, each experiencing their own version of my nightmare. It's all connected now through whatever is happening to our bodies. Our bones become recipients for something seeking entry. The vibrations intensified, focusing on my jawbone, my teeth, the delicate structures of my inner ear. My body had become an antenna, precisely tuned to receive a broadcast from an unfamiliar place. Not from any earthly source, I realized with sudden, horrifying clarity, but from somewhere beyond ordinary space, a dimension adjacent to our own, separated by a membrane that grew thinner with each calibration. I felt like I was being pulled into another dimension, a world that was slowly filling the space around me. The sounds grew louder and louder, as if I was listening to a song without lyrics, a song that no one but me could hear. And in my mind, there was a strange feeling, as if I were joining some collective, an invisible guild of carpenters who lived and died according to standards I couldn't understand. Can I stop? Or will I continue to be caught in this vortex, where every touch, every movement, can be a sign of inevitable change? When dawn broke, I drove again. Even though I know it's futile now, my journeys no longer have any meaning with distance. Distance cannot stop what has found me. Telephones, inanimate objects, are only its first method of contact. Now, it has more direct access. That night, in another anonymous motel room, I noticed that there was no physical phone present. It doesn't need one anymore. At exactly 3:33 a.m., I heard a bell ringing inside my skull. Felt my jaw vibrate with the sound, as if the sound was traveling not only through the air but into my very body. I responded the only way I could now, by thinking the word, hello. Synchronization finally began, the voice answered, crystal clear, although there was no sound to disturb the air. Your physical form is now a sufficient vessel for transmission. I felt my body change with each word, as if we were no longer sharing the same physical space but existing together in another. The vibration this time started in my hand, a trembling that I couldn't control. My fingers curl into impossible positions, joints bend backwards, tendons tense. My right index finger extended stiffly, then began moving in a circular motion, tracing the path of a rotating dial that wasn't there. 3 full rotations, then 3 more. Three connections are established. I felt a presence on the other end of this impossible communication. Not a single entity, but a collective, vast and ancient, waiting patiently on a gulf my mind cannot comprehend. They've been around for decades, using old copper networks, physical switches, mechanical devices that we've abandoned for digital convenience. My body is no longer completely my own. During the day, I maintain an appearance of normalcy, although sometimes people notice me when my movements stutter briefly, when my speech patterns momentarily adopt unusual cadences. At night, I surrender to control, my bones vibrate with transmissions that I cannot consciously explain. I have learned to live with it. I maintain my collection, even adding to it now, guided by impulses that I do not question. I'm no longer afraid of the 3:33 a.m. connection. I have become a point of intersection, a human switch, routing communications whose purpose I may never understand. I saw others stop, looking around in confusion at the sound they barely registered. Occasionally, I answer these payphones, pressing the receiver to my ear so bone conduction can begin, relaying messages to a growing network of human conductors across the country. I say their full name and instruct them to mark their presence. Dial 33. Network is expanding. The signal grows stronger with each new node. Now, we are all connected. All parts of the circuit. Each person, each point of contact, is forming an inseparable network. These vibrations not only affected my body but entered my mind, passing through it like an electric current. Once again, I understood that I was no longer just human, but part of something larger, beyond my control. Part of this web, part of an ancient presence that fills our space. We are all waiting for whatever is trying to come through. I remember the first time I noticed three figures looming in the early morning clouds. The air had felt heavier than usual that Sunday. Thick fog clung to the ground like a damp veil, and the faint scent of eucalyptus was undercut by something metallic, almost like an old coin held too long between sweaty palms. My chest tightened and I wondered if I was going down with something. However, I told myself it was just the cold dawn air teasing my lungs. However, a prickly awareness spread across the back of my head, as if an invisible presence flickered just at the edge of my vision. I've been running in that park every Sunday at 6 a.m. for as long as I can remember. Routine often brings me peace. My private therapy session amid swaths of dense blue with a chorus of birds occasionally cheering me on. But about 6 weeks ago, something changed. Or maybe I've changed. I started seeing them. The three young men looked so funny, they must have been a prank. Their mulets are styled so perfectly, it's as if they've stepped out of 1987 without a strand of hair. The first time our paths crossed, they looked up at me with the strangest expressions, a cross between joy and expectation. I tried to ignore them, jogging past with a wave of politeness. But the following Sunday, they were there again, standing near a line of eucalyptus trees, their silhouettes half hidden by the mist. The same basketball sparkled with a dull sheen, the leather threads worn at the seams. Their invitation felt unspoken but clear. Something flickered in their eyes, an urgent, almost predatory curiosity. I ran faster that day, the pounding in my chest coming more from the nerves than from exertion. By the third Sunday, curiosity had me in its grip. I found myself slowing down as I approached them. They seemed younger than I first thought, or maybe just unusual energy. One of them held the ball, an offer, both simple and full of subtle menace. He said something along the lines of, "Let's shoot some rounds," but not in so many words. It's the tilt of his head and the snap of his fingers. There was a strange resonance to his voice as if coming from afar, warped and hollow. I felt my heartbeat in my ears and my breath caught in my throat. Despite the sick feeling in my stomach, I was drawn in. I have my own reasons for finally saying yes. Maybe part of me thinks I'm dreaming. Or maybe I just need to see if the tension rolling in my head is real. So I nodded. It's not just that I missed it before. It simply doesn't exist. But now it does, and behind it sits a worn basketball court. But there is something else. Every line on the court seemed to glow like neon residue, unable to decide whether it belonged to the present or not. The scoreboard, sitting at an impossible angle, flashed with unreadable numbers. This feeling was like I was being drawn into an inexplicable place, a space that was both familiar and strange. The lines on the soccer field, the dim light, and those figures standing around me. I didn't know who they were, but I felt this connection, this strange attraction, as if I were part of a game I didn't know I was in. I heard a strange hiss in the wind, almost like muffled laughter or frantic applause. My body hums with anxiety, every muscle tense as if preparing for a confrontation. The three men walked toward the free throw line, dribbling with the ball with ease. When I stepped onto the cracked asphalt, it was colder than I expected. My breathing became ragged. I bowed my knees, lowered my center of gravity, hoping they would pass the ball to me. Instead, someone with the most perfect mullet rolls the ball gently across the court, so that it only bounces once. With that single bounce, everything changed. Backboards, rims, paint lines, even fences sag. One by one, they dissolved into a cloud of luminescent dust. It's like looking at a photo burned back. I felt a cold wind swirl around me, and in an instant, I was standing alone in bare dirt, with no trace of asphalt under my feet. My stomach clenched with an almost nauseating fear. The sunlight filtering through the eucalyptus canopy looked dimmer, and the sky above had taken on a sickly gray hue. The strangest part was the complete silence. Not a rustle, not even the hum of traffic. I was alone, my heart pounding, sweat trickling down my temples. The dryness in my mouth made me swallow. My legs were shaking so much I could barely stand. The trio, the ball, even the strange court were gone, replaced by an empty plot of land. It could be part of the park's wilderness, a place I've never ventured into. But it could also have existed outside the park entirely. Time seemed to stutter. A moment I felt sure only a few seconds had passed. Next it seemed like an hour might have passed. I tried to retrace my steps to find my way back to the main run. But the eucalyptus line looks different. The tree trunks are irregularly spaced like silly soldiers twisted by a hidden force. When I finally found my way back to the main loop of the park, I felt unsettled. My breath was still in gasps, and my pulse was in my temples. Sunday crowds have begun to trickle. Runners, dog walkers, a few early morning yoga enthusiasts. No one noticed my disheveled state. Adrenaline was still coursing through me, and I remember swallowing water from a nearby fountain, its metallic taste making me gag. I questioned my own sanity the entire trip home. The following weeks were a cloud of sleepless nights and anxious days. I debated with myself about whether I should tell anyone about what I was going through. Finally, I convinced a friend, someone I occasionally run with, to come with me. I needed confirmation, or at least some witnesses who could confirm that I hadn't lost my mind. We arrived at the park before sunrise, each wearing a determined expression. My friend commented that the air tasted as if trapped in a closed room for years. I took that as a sign. Around the same bend at 6 a.m., I saw them again. Or maybe they feel more accurate. My friend squinted in their direction, but showed only mild confusion. He told me they looked odd, like part of some retro-themed photo shoot. Then he said that one of them beckoned us. I froze, my chest tightening painfully, but forced myself to move forward. They pointed out the eucalyptus. My friend seemed unsure. He whispered that he heard a distant whistle, something like an old-school referee call. I tried to keep my breathing steady. However, the second we stepped onto the path, I noticed that the court had returned. But this time, it looked newer, like a fresh coat of paint had been put down just hours before. A scoreboard flickered, its stand seemingly filled with ghostly shadows. My friend, however, insisted he saw nothing but me entering an overgrown void. He said the trees looked like giant spinning tops from his perspective, spinning with a hiss. A dizzying wave of vertigo hit me. Sweat rolled down my spine, soaking the back of my shirt. My friend said that from his vantage point, I was just standing there, my arm raised as if taking an imaginary photo. He thought I had lost my mind, but he also admitted that he could hear the invisible cheerleaders chanting, even though he couldn't see them. That's when fear twisted inside me like a snake. Reality has been warped in two different ways for each of us. Not the right version, and doesn't feel safe. I tried to dribble, but my friend yelled at me that I was just hitting my palms in empty air. Meanwhile, I feel real skin under my fingertips. The weight of the ball can be felt as it bounces. The tension in my chest turned into a suffocating grip, and my lungs begged for more oxygen than I could pull out. I want to drop the ball, run, but I seem rooted to this position. The hair on my arm stood on top of my head, and a buzzing sound, like a high-voltage wire, filled my ears. The scoreboard flashed, the numbers rolling around in a frenzy, even though I couldn't decipher them. All at once, the ring disappeared, dissolving into that same glowing powder. The stands followed, then the courts until the entire structure disappeared again, leaving behind only the bare, uneven earth. In the blink of an eye, I was alone. He said he saw my figure flicker for a moment like a failed projection, my face conflicted with terror. He swears the palm trees around us spin in a slow circle, each trunk rotating on its axis as if they were mechanical materials. He heard the faint echo of a bell, and then it was gone. For days afterward, I couldn't stop replaying the incident in my mind. Everything feels distorted. The taste of my food, the color of the sky, even the texture of my own skin. I developed a stutter in my breathing as if I was always on the verge of exhaling. Memories of their outdated clothes and vacant smiles were burned into my retinas. I avoided the park out of a primal feeling of fear. But deep down, some twisted curiosity pulled at me. I was faced with something that was not just supernatural, but perhaps from a dimension that flows into us under the right conditions. Finally, the nightmares forced me to face it again. My dreams are feverish loops where I run around a kaleidoscopic court, a scoreboard screaming 0 after 0. And those three men float above the rim, taunting me with silent laughter. My heart pounded so hard that I woke up with a start, bathed in sweat, my mouth drier than the desert air. Sitting alone in my living room at 3 a.m., I would question if I was doing all of this. However, the fear that was so tangible, so physical in my chest was just my imagination. I returned to the park before dawn on Sunday, 7 weeks after my first sighting. Every step feels like an act of defiance against an invisible threat. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I had trouble swallowing. The sky was still dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the street lights far away from me. I took the path slowly this time, not running as if any sudden movement could trigger the phenomenon again. Nothing, no sign of them, just me and the silence of a sleeping park. Relief and disappointment tangled in my chest. My exhalation was shaky and I felt the adrenaline fade, leaving me shaking. Maybe I didn't have this. Perhaps the hold on me has been broken. My muscles relaxed a little and I started jogging, focusing on the comforting rhythm of my steps. Then I caught it, a neon glint in my peripheral vision. I stopped in the middle, my breath catching in my throat, the faint sound of gravel behind me. I turned around, my heart pounding so hard I could barely look straight. There, beyond the eucalyptus line, I discovered a spark of blue and pink. My stomach dropped when I saw one of them walk out, holding the leather ball at his side. His mullet sparkled as if coated in mourning. He didn't speak or gesture. He just stared. The silence of the park seemed to intensify, pressing against my eardrums. I feel my legs tense, my body ready to bolt. But a strange solution solved it for me. Maybe it's the fight or flight response. I get closer, each breath tortured and shallow. An image of that dissolved court flashed in my mind. How it crumbled into glowing dust. How it left me isolated in that void-like space. However, I refused to move. My whole body trembled, but I held my ground. Suddenly, the main character threw a basketball at me. A slow, deliberate arc that seemed to hang in mid-air for a moment too long. My instincts kicked in. I caught it. Immediately my fingers met the scratched skin. I felt like electricity ran through my arms, lifting my pulse. I could hear the echo of an invisible crowd, a roaring wave of excitement, but the three men did not approach. Instead, they began to fade, merging with the backdrop of trees and swirling shadows. My vision adjusted. My heart pounded to an almost painful rhythm. I could barely breathe, as if the air had become solid. I was left holding the ball, the neon edges of their presence swimming away like ghosts. I wanted to throw it away, to rid myself of this object that linked me to them. But for reasons beyond my understanding, I couldn't free my hands. After what felt like hours, I was lightly on the ground. In that moment, I felt an unspoken understanding. I was free to leave, but this wouldn't be the last time we crossed paths. The fleeting forms of the three figures seemed etched into the air, a remnant left after the image burned into the retina of my mind. I fled the park, breathing so hard my lungs burned. My shirt clung to my body, drenched in cold sweat. My heart continued to beat relentlessly, punishingly, all the way home. The entire drive back, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them crammed into my back seat, or perhaps floating on the road, eyes shining like tail lights. It's been a few days since that meeting. I did not return to the park. Every time I pass by its entrance, I feel that my fear, creeping up my spine, is accompanied by a vivid memory of neon tank tops and silent stairs. Yet part of me knew that if I opened those gates at dawn, would find them again, or at least the echo of their presence. I still hear the squeak of rubber soles on asphalt when I close my eyes at night. I still feel the weight of the old basketball in my hand, the worn leather pressed against my skin like the lingering imprint of a dream I can't quite shake. I don't know if they are stuck in time, or if the court exists on an overlapping plane of reality. All I know is that whenever I recall that swirling luminescent dust, my breathing is hindered and cold sweat makes my palms. I'm still haunted by the whisper of a referee's whistle that no one else could hear. As the sun sets and the shadows lengthen, I sometimes imagine them waiting for me under the eucalyptus trees. The ball is scratched and ready. I imagine the silence of a crowd that isn't there, the flicker of a scoreboard from a past that refuses to stay buried. My heart was pounding and my throat was dry, but I couldn't completely deny the pull. I'm safe now, but not sure how long it will last. The strange synthesis between their realm and their mine, and with each passing Sunday, it grew stronger. I feel that one day the boundaries may be broken, leaving me trapped on a court that exists only in nightmares, alone, but never completely alone. That possibility clawed at me in the restless hours before dawn. Yet I hold on to the slightest thread of hope that what I face can be overcome. Yet every time I close my eyes, the echoes of bouncing skin and ghostly, cheering reminders remind me that some things once seen refuse to let you go. And so I lay awake, adrenaline coursing through my veins, waiting for the following Sunday morning when the eucalyptus groves might reveal a court that was by no means found. The first hint that something in my life was irreparably wrong happened just before dawn last week when I woke up to find the mirror in my living room dripping from the inside. In the half-light of my apartment, a pale silver liquid paled behind the glass, forming smudged pistils on my reflection. Instead of feeling curious, I was consumed by an instant, suffocating fear, as if an invisible hand had reached through the glass and gripped my insides. My heart pounded so hard that my rib cage ached with every sharp pain. Even in that moment of terror, I realized something about mirrors. I asked for this. I suppose the whole ordeal started with my superstition, even though my line of work is usually unforgiving of such irrationalities. I am a day trader. I specialize in rapid movements of stocks, forex, and futures markets. By the end of most days, I felt unstoppable or utterly defeated, a volatile pendulum that rarely rested in a comfortable middle. As any trader can confirm, we live and die by our own decisions. Profits and losses may balance out on the razor's uncertain profits. That uncertainty gets under my skin. I became indignant to indignant. And in my exhaustion, I found myself drawn to the idea that I could fade away profitably by appealing to something beyond the usual logic of charts and data. One night, after a particularly tiring session, I visited a local antiques fair. I don't know why I went in the first place. Something about gossiping through subjects older than me seemed a suitable distraction from the endless screens. I came across this particular mirror with a cracked wooden frame. Its edges chip and darken with age, and a fine fracture spider spreads across the back. At the time, I remember it looking like a perfect prop from a dime store horror movie. But as soon as I locked eyes with my reflection in those old glasses, an idea took root in my mind. Perhaps the mirror with all its stored background carries some invisible energy that can be harnessed. So I bought the mirror, brought it home and put it in my living room. The same night, actually early morning, when I was too wired to sleep, I found myself staring at the reflective surface, feeling the weight of my recent trading losses pressing against my chest. My breathing was shallow and sweat clung to the back of my neck. A madness of sorts forced me to make an offer. I rummaged around, desperate for something to write with, until I noticed a tube of lipstick wedged into a crack along the mirror's wooden frame. Perhaps it belonged to the previous owner. Maybe it just remained there as a strange coincidence. I'm not the writer of the package. My speech is frantic and unstable. The red lipstick smears easily, and my hand shakes as I write. Yet I felt almost giddy, as if a primal part of me believed I had tapped into forces capable of bending reality to my will. When I woke up the next day, the post was gone. Not just erased, but completely gone. The glass is so smooth, it appears polished, with no trace of that desperate plea. For a moment, I doubted that I had done it, wondering if exhaustion had caused me to hallucinate. However, what happened later that day shattered all the ambiguity. 1 hour 5 minutes and 9 seconds. I was trading a set of options that, by all reasonable analysis, should be worthless. Something pushed me to go against all the fundamentals. My whole body buzzed with anxiety, but I placed the order anyway. At the end of the market, the stock made such an unstoppable move that I doubled my investment in less than an hour. 1 hour 5 minutes and 32 seconds. It feels very exciting, but not scary either. It was as if I had hit some cosmic jackpot. That same evening, after the markets closed, I noticed the mirror. The reflective surface has become hazy, as if a fine mist clings to the inside of the glass. I tried wiping it with a cloth, but the haze wouldn't go away. Then I saw something that stopped me cold. Faint fingerprints pressed against the inside of the mirror. They are not my prints. They don't match the pattern of my veins and their size is a little larger than my hand. I felt a lump in my throat. A cold feeling of fear ran down my spine, and I forced myself to look away, convincing myself that I was only seeing an illusion brought on by the stress of the day. But the illusion does not trickle down. Over the next few days, the mirror began to produce a stream of silvery liquid behind the glass. I could see it in my peripheral vision, slowly sliding down like tears. But whenever I turned around to face it head-on, the marks would disappear, leaving me unsure whether they were really there or not. My chest often tightens. My hands will shake. My mouth felt dry and a thin layer of sweat chilled my forehead. Yet despite all this horror, my trading still skyrocketed. Every choice I make turns to gold. People in my day trading circle started calling me the man with the heart of gold. Behind their nods of agreement, I detected a hint of jealousy. But I silently accepted their admiration. The day after my second big win, I noticed something else. Each time I sold my position, the blurred marks on the mirror would shift, forming shapes that resembled downward arrows or eerie negative symbols that served as a warning. If I tried to ignore these signals, the next morning I would find the objects in my apartment cracked perfectly in half. My drinking glass, the vase in the corner, even the old photo frame with a photo of my parents. There is no mention of their passing away. We just don't keep in touch. Each crack was diagonal, precise, as if some invisible blade had cut through them. Whenever I hear that shattering sound, my heart beats so hard that it feels like it's about to burst. A strange rhythm invaded my life. I began to treat the mirror as a living organism, trying to appease it by adjusting my trades to the signals it gave. If the prince forms an arrow, I will stop selling. If they are shaped like a plus sign, I will make the purchase. This system may sound crazy, but it works. Profit after profit, my account swelled, and each win in the markets brought with it a feeling of dread, as if I was being led somewhere I didn't want to go. The voice in my head kept whispering that I bargained for this, even if I didn't really believe it at the time. Then the nightmares began. In there, the mirror would rise like a doorway, and I would see a shape on the other side. It wore my vest and tie, but its face was hidden by a glittering, featureless mask, like polished silver, reflecting everything but revealing nothing. The shape would tap the glass from the inside, and I would feel each tap echo through my veins, a hollow beat that would wake me up in a cold sweat. There are nights when I wake up to the distinct sound of my knuckles rapping around the living room mirror. But when I turned on the light, the apartment would be silent, empty, and that eerie silence pressed against my ears, making me dizzy with fear. I tried talking to a friend, an older trader who prided himself on his calm logic. Even though I used indirect language, he inferred that I was heading towards a breakdown. He suggested I take a break from trading and maybe consult a therapist. I never specifically mentioned the mirror. I didn't know how to describe it without sounding deranged, so I just nodded at his advice. That same night, I dreamed that I told the whole story to that masked reflection, and it just stared back at me, its silver face expressionless, its identical outfit taunting me by fitting it better than ever. Over time, the feeling of being watched permeated every corner of my daily routine. I would feel it in the shower, half expecting to see a silhouette in the steamy bathroom mirror. I would feel it as I scrolled through the trading charts on my phone, feeling a chill in the air, as if there was a presence hovering behind my chair. Occasionally the overhead lights flicker. The persistent hum of my computer screen seemed louder, more like an electronic hiss. In these moments, I notice a sinking feeling in my gut, as if I'm teetering on the edge of an abyss, about to fall into something dark and bottomless. Last week, that final shock of realization arrived. I went to bed after an unusually high wind, my chest still heaving with adrenaline, my arms cold with tension. In the middle of the night, I woke up to get water from the kitchen. Passing by the living room, I glanced at the mirror in the dim light. At first, I just saw something wrong with the reflection. Then the full horror of it struck. The view inside the mirror shows my office, my trading facility, my desk, even the messy pile of documents. But I'm not in it. The chair is empty. However, there was another person sitting there wearing my clothes hunched over the table. Their heads turned towards me, revealing that shiny silver faceless mask. My throat tightened, my breath caught in my lungs, and deep terror sank into my soul. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my mouth. The person stood up, walked up to the glass from its side, then raised a gloved hand and tapped inside. Each knock on the door vibrated through my living room like a muffled heartbeat. The mask's blank surface caught the faint light from my desk lamp, causing it to flash like a blade. The next day, I tried to go through my trading routine again, but every time I looked at the screen, I was assaulted by intrusive thoughts. I keep remembering that reflection, the silver face and the uncomfortable precision of the character's movements. My trading that day was still profitable, but I wasn't happy at all. My heart was pounding so hard I was worried I might faint. When I blinked, I thought I saw that reflected face flashing on the black screen after the trading platform closed. Then the climactic moment happened 2 nights ago. My profits have reached a new high. An unimaginable number that should have made me proud or at least relieved. Instead, I found myself pacing around my apartment, feeling the walls closing in. In the silence, I heard a whisper like the slight sound of metal scratching on glass. It wasn't my voice and didn't seem to come from any identifiable direction. The sound gradually increased, a shrill screech that made my ears hurt. In my mind, it was like a request, an order for me to come closer to the mirror. My throat is as dry as sand. My hands trembled uncontrollably. However, part of me couldn't resist. I trudged into the living room, my steps heavy with fear. In the mirror, that haunting scene appeared again. My office, without me, but occupied by my clothed figure. This time, the figure raised his hand to signal me to come forward, pressing that silver face right against the glass. My heart beat so hard it hurt. Every muscle in my body was screaming to run, but I couldn't look away. The figure was enclosed within the mirror, a gesture that made my chest vibrate. Its stance told me everything. It wants to change places. It wants me on the other side, looking out at the world through a barrier I may never be able to break again. I stumbled backwards, almost knocking over a nearby table. The lights above flickered, filling the room with flickering light and darkness. I felt a wave of panic churn in my gut as if I was about to vomit. My reflection, or rather the figure wearing my reflection, continued to knock on the door, the movements becoming more and more urgent. Streams of silvery liquid oozed out inside the glass, swirling around that terrifying shape. My eyes burned and my vision blurred with tears. Or maybe with that strange reflection dancing in my periphery. In a moment of utter desperation, I grabbed the nearest object, a dusty cloth from the table, and threw it at the mirror, covering the glass completely. For a second, the knocking stopped. Silence reigned, a meaningful silence that made my eardrums vibrate. I knelt down, gripping the edge of the coffee table for support, my lungs heaving. Sweat dripped down the back of my neck and my pulse was pounding as if it wanted to tear out of my veins. A wave of dizziness threatened to sweep me away as I realized I had no plan, no idea how to proceed. I spent the next day avoiding my apartment, wandering aimlessly around the city, trying to drink coffee I couldn't taste, forcing food through my throat that always felt choked. I ignored the trading software on my phone, even though I knew that if I looked, I would see new opportunities to capitalize on my winning streak. But the thought of increasing my assets now was obscene, like raising a monstrous shadow that I had invited into my life. When I finally worked up the courage to return home late that night, I found the living room dark, the sheets still covering the mirror. I didn't hear any sound. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of naive hope that maybe, just maybe, I had broken the bond. That illusion was shattered when I saw my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face looked normal, but the corner of my mouth flashed a metallic sheen as if a drop of that silver liquid had stuck to my lips. I panicked and wiped my face, but there was no moisture. There were no signs at all. My heart beat harder and a scream choked in my throat. However, I remained silent, too scared to make a sound. Last night my phone vibrated with a text message. Fellow traders were celebrating an unprecedented market rally, but I couldn't concentrate. My gaze kept drifting towards the mirror, still covered, but I could feel the attention in my bones. It was as if the entity inside was waiting. Then I decided that I couldn't live like this. Half expecting that my next breath might be stolen by something from the other side, I was determined to break the mirror to destroy the path I had opened. I went to the closet and searched for a hammer, then returned to the living room. Trembling with fear so deep that my teeth crumbled. Standing in front of the mirror, I hesitated. My gut clenched with a sense of extreme caution, as if shattering that glass might unleash whatever was hidden behind it, unleash it into my world. The cold metal of the hammer felt heavy in my hand, and sweat dripped into my hand. My heart was pounding, violent explosions in my chest. For a moment, I could almost hear a voice behind the cloth, a whisper urging me to remove the visor and look at the face behind the silver mask. But I can't attack on my own. Instead, I took slow, shaky steps back, then sprinted out of the apartment, adrenaline pumping through me. I jumped in my car and drove aimlessly until dawn, my heart pounding, tears of despair burning my eyes. Now I am sitting in a motel on the outskirts of the city, writing these lines with trembling hands. My laptop flashed on the chipboard, the screen showing the market opening bell. I cannot trade on my own. My mind replayed that reflection over and over again. I kept imagining a silver mask pressed against the glass. One summon each time. I wondered if the old mirror, its dusty cloth still covering it, was waiting for me at home, or if it had found a way to escape the confines of the glass. Occasionally, I glanced at the cheap mirror above the motel's sink, half expecting to see a flash of mercury or that faceless shape in my clothes. Every part of me felt tight and raw, as if electricity were crackling just under my skin. My heart rate doesn't slow down. My breathing is shallow. I felt a bitter taste in my throat every time I thought about turning around to face that monstrous reflection. But I can't avoid it forever. The further I got away, the more I felt an invisible string pulling me back. This is my job. I practically scrolled the invitation with that stolen lipstick, dedicating a piece of myself to the fleeting thrill of unstoppable profits. And now I have to pay. I'm not sure what I'll do next. I was torn between destroying the mirror once and for all or trying to break the deal some other way, assuming sanity had some role in what I was getting into. I replayed images in my head of me raising that hammer, smashing the glass, and being showered with shards that cut through my clothes in perfect diagonal lines. No one dies in that scenario, but something about the consequences is always too disturbing to bear. One thing is certain, I cannot continue. The money in my account felt toxic, a ticking bomb that emphasized my bargain. My whole body trembled with fear at the thought that my reflection could take my place, wearing my clothes, sitting at my desk, living my life on the outside while I was trapped behind the glass. Even writing these words makes me feel a surge of nausea, and I feel a surge of panic in my heart. I glanced into the hotel mirror again and saw only my own terrified face, but I no longer believed it would stay the same. This is my confession, or perhaps my testimony to any cruel cosmic force toying with human greed. Tonight I could return to that apartment and find the cloth on the floor, the mirror calling to me, the silver mask waiting. Or I could muster the courage to break it with a single swing, risking whatever it unleashed. Either way, I feel like there's no real victory here. The best I could hope for was an unpleasant confrontation between me and the haunted artifact I had unleashed with my own hands. Even as I type these last lines, the hair on my arm stands up and cold sweat flows down my forehead. The motel room seemed darker than before, and I could almost hear a light tapping sound as if it were coming from a hallway mirror or antique glass miles away. My heartbeat pounded loudly in my ears, and a hollow pain tightened my chest. The breath I take now feels like it could be my last breath of free air before something tries to claim me. Still, I clung to the hope that I hadn't completely lost control. Perhaps admitting one's madness is the first step toward escaping it. I have survived these past weeks without being completely overcome. If there is any solution ahead, it will not come lightly. I braced myself for the possibility that when I finally faced that mirror again, I would see my office once more, empty except for a masked entity tapping on the glass, ordering me to change seats. And I will resist with every ounce of will I have left, hoping it will be enough to sever the connection and regain my reflection forever. If I fail, I will remain in the endless echo of silver eyes and dripping mercury, haunted by the reflection I conjured in a moment of desperate greed. If I succeed, I can find peace, although the memory of that entity's hollow tapping will haunt me every night forever. I still remember the overhead lights seemed to flicker as I entered the airplane cabin for the first time on that fateful trip. The air felt thick, as if something heavy clung to every molecule, giving me goosebumps. Even the usual hum of the engine sounded a little strange, rattling like an out-of-tune chorus. Maybe it was just anxiety playing tricks on me. But deep down, I feel it's more than that. There was something about that flight, about every flight since, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Made my heart beat so loudly that I thought everyone around me could hear it. It was as if the plane itself was breathing out a long, low warning whine. I've never liked flying, but over the years I've tried to control that fear by staying awake during the flight and distracting myself with watching movies or reading books. Whenever I feel the panic rising, I open my laptop or watch a random movie. I absolutely refuse to sleep on the plane, convinced that if I let my guard down, something terrible would happen. The first time I fell asleep mid-flight was the spark that ignited my current nightmare. I only nodded for a moment, but it was enough to unleash the most vivid dream I had ever experienced. And since then, it has haunted me every time I close my eyes at cruise altitude. In that dream, I saw a flight attendant wearing a navy blue uniform, styled in 1969. Her hair was neatly pinned under a small hat. She walked down the aisle with almost mechanical grace. When she stopped in my row, she leaned forward as if trying to offer me a drink. Instead, she gently took a small plastic badge and pinned it to my shirt pocket. My breath kept catching in my throat because I immediately noticed that the badge was covered in a pungent liquid that smelled like fuel. Then she leaned in close enough that I could feel her breath in my ear. She whispered, "Now you are responsible." Every time those 3 words make my heart pound in my chest. And that's when chaos struck. I woke up in a panic and believed the plane was falling out of the sky. The first time it happened, the flight went smoothly up to that point. Without warning, we were thrown around by aggressive airbags. Furniture was thrown into the aisle, the storage bins above rattled, people screamed. But the strangest thing was that after landing, some passengers claimed they saw me standing up during the chaos. It seemed like I was in some kind of trance, pointing toward the exit as if I were a member of the crew. I can't remember any of it. However, the details they gave are completely consistent with the aircraft's safety procedures. Even worse, I found an actual flight attendant badge taped to my shirt when I finally staggered off the plane. It was clamped so tightly that I almost tore my clothes trying to take it off. The plastic was damp and had the smell of kerosene or something similar clinging to it. My hands were shaking as I dropped it into my carry-on luggage. Then I found it again and the shiny, fuel-like goo had stained the fabric of my shirt pocket. The badge looks retro with its bold text for the airline's old logo, something you'd expect from decades ago. I tried to brush the whole thing off as my overactive imagination collided with the chaos of reality. I felt a stiffness in my body, as if an invisible force was pulling me closer to the chair. The steps gradually slowed down, even though I knew I had to move forward. This time, seat 17A became the symbol of an inevitable nightmare. Thousands of thoughts ran through my head, but I couldn't stop walking. The badge from 1969 seems to be calling me, reminding me of the hauntings that never leave. Every time I set foot on a plane, I think about what the flight attendant said in my dream: the next landing will be the last. It was impossible to know whether it was a threat or a warning. Everything around me blurred as I sat in my chair. The noise of everyone around me faded away, and only the strong beating of my heart remained. As the plane started to taxi, a heavy feeling fell on my chest. Once again, I couldn't escape that feeling. The nightmares and haunting images still persist. The vague memories of the badge, the flight attendant, and those strange words were like an invisible string connecting me to a world I couldn't understand. The engine roared as the plane began to fly, but in my mind, something was still pulling me out of reality. A cold wind covered my body. I could feel its presence, watching me from behind. The whisper in that dream never left me. "Now you have to take responsibility." But I couldn't do anything other than breathe rapidly, trying to calm my mind. I know that if I don't overcome this fear, I will never escape that cycle of obsession. As the plane continued to soar, I couldn't help but wonder if this would be my last flight, or if I would have to face these horrors again forever. Every word they said made me more confused. All I remember is the panic as the plane shook violently, the feeling of not being able to control my body. How can I stand up in that situation? How could I calmly lead everyone while I was in the grip of extreme fear? I can't understand. These passengers, did they really see me? Or maybe, there was something controlling me, from outside or within myself? When I stepped off the plane, my hands were still shaking. I tried to control my steps, but the strange feelings continued to haunt me. The badge mysteriously disappeared during the flight, but I could still feel its presence. The cold feeling, not of metal but of something invisible but powerful, was watching me, waiting for me to enter the next nightmare. As I walked out of the plane area, the passengers' eyes were still on me, as if they were looking at some strange creature. Some people didn't even say anything, just quietly observed me, as if they knew better than me about what had just happened. I felt an invisible distance between me and them, a strangeness in the air that I couldn't explain. At that moment, I knew that I could not continue to avoid what had happened. Just as the flight attendant whispered in her dream, "Now you are responsible." That's not just a meaningless statement. It was a warning, a strange invitation for me to face the things I had done, the things I couldn't understand. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that image, the old badge, that flight attendant, and the silver mask that reflected my image. I cannot escape it. Something had opened inside me, a door to a world I had no control over. And every flight, every time I thought I could escape, was a step closer to what I feared most, my annexation into the world of nightmares, to which I would never be able to return. A suffocating feeling enveloped me as I looked at that badge, as if it was sucking all the energy from the air. Every detail of it, from the faded logo to the rusted metal, seems to emanate a hypnosis, as if what it represents is not just a fragment of an old memory but an invisible trace of something trying to find its way back. Why is it still here? Why does it smell like kerosene, like a sign from the past, a memory I can't explain? This feeling is not an escape anymore. I can no longer avoid what happened, what I went through. The haunting of the badge, the nightmares on the plane, and the whispering voice of the flight attendant were too strong for me to ignore. Every time I close my eyes, I see myself standing in that airplane cabin, smelling the gas and oil, hearing the shrill whir of the engine, and seeing the image of her, whispering, "Now you are responsible." I don't know if this is some kind of curse or not. But one thing I know for sure is that I cannot continue to live in this fear. Every time I step on a plane, I feel like I'm falling into a trap that I created for myself, like I'm no longer the master of my life. I'm just a puppet in a game I don't fully understand. I will have to face the badge, the mirror, and the invisible things that have taken over me. Every time I try to escape, they pull me back in, and I don't know if I have the strength to break this vicious cycle. But the only thing I'm sure of is that I can't let myself get caught up in this vortex forever. In the end, I had to decide. And not like the dolls I've seen. It had a different presence, something calm yet dangerous. Every detail of it, from its silky hair to its bright eyes, which seemed to see through all objects, created a feeling that I couldn't shake. I'm not one to believe in rumors about haunted objects, but right now, I can't help but feel that something is wrong. When I placed the doll in the glass cabinet, the surrounding space seemed to become more solid. Its shadow stretched out, as if taking some of the air and time with it. The whisper inside me became clearer and clearer, a sound I couldn't identify, both like a breeze and an urge that contained something unpredictable. I can't stop, and I can't leave. A strange urge made me want to know more about it. I started asking around, but each person I asked had a different answer. One person said it was a precious antique that could bring good luck, while another person advised me to get rid of it immediately, because it could bring bad luck. The conflicting answers left me unable to decide. But I couldn't leave the doll behind, because I felt it had become a part of me, a part that I couldn't easily throw away. Every night, as the light in the glass case dimmed and I prepared for bed, I felt the doll's gaze drift over me, as if it were watching my every move. I heard soft noises in the night, sounds of touching glass, clicking sounds like someone was moving. Every morning, the doll is still there, silent, but I know that it has changed something in the atmosphere of the house. And then one night, as I was standing near it, I realized that something had completely changed. The doll's eyes moved, seemingly looking straight at me. I stood there, unable to move, only able to look at it. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't understand what was going on, but one thing was certain, this doll was not just an antique. And that was just the beginning of a series of strange phenomena, things I couldn't explain. Shadows passed by, soft whispers sounded like a call from the other world, and the doll, still standing there, kept her own secret. With each passing day, I felt more and more drawn into an inescapable spiral, where I no longer knew what I was facing. My eyes widened, I stopped laughing as I looked at the doll. That crack is not an ordinary scratch. It was a strange line, a crack that seemed to have just appeared, extending from the doll's neck to the chest. I couldn't believe my eyes. I blinked a few times, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. However, the crack remained, as if an invisible force was causing the doll to change. As I sat down closer to observe, I noticed the light in the glass cabinet flickering strangely, as if it was reflecting something I couldn't see. The doll's eyes sparkled, but not in the way I remembered. They seemed more alive now, as if they were trying to get my attention. I felt a sense of fear rising in my chest. I can't just leave it like that, I thought to myself. But as I was about to reach for it, a shiver ran down my spine. The doll's eyes seemed to follow my every move, as if it was waiting for what I would do next. There was only a feeling of obsession that couldn't be dispelled, a strong urge that I couldn't take my eyes off of it. That night, when I went to bed, I still couldn't stop thinking about the doll. Strange sounds, vague whispers in the wind, unexplained cracks. I began to feel the presence of something that could not be seen, but could be felt. It feels like it's lurking around me, not just in the house, but maybe in my thoughts, in the shadows just out of reach. The next day, I decided to get rid of it, but when I went to the glass cabinet and looked in, I couldn't do it. The doll was still standing there, her eyes shining and her mouth looking like she was about to smile. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this doll was no ordinary toy. It was part of something bigger, something dark that I had unintentionally introduced into my life. Something inevitable, something that will probably follow me forever, and I've only just scratched the surface of it. At night, I sat in front of the glass cabinet, the light fading from the window. This time, I didn't put the radio nearby. I decided to leave things alone, hoping that the silence would help me find a way to control what was happening. But as soon as I looked at the doll, I felt like I was being watched. It stood there, its eyes still blank and cold, its glassy eyes reflecting the pale light of the room. My mind began to picture all the bizarre things that had happened, the small but undeniable movements. Suddenly, a very light sound rang out from inside the glass case, as if something had moved slightly. I strained my eyes to look at it, but the doll still stood motionless, unchanged from before. I began to wonder if I had imagined it all. But soon, another sound rang out, this time clearer. There was a clicking sound from the doll's joints, a terrifying sound as if an invisible hand was controlling it from behind. My legs became heavy, I tried to stand up but my body felt paralyzed. Unable to bear it anymore, I decided to move closer. Each step seemed to last forever, and the air around me became thick and heavy. I felt a presence in the room, something behind me, watching me, as if the doll was more than just an inanimate object. When I approached the glass cabinet, I saw its eyes sparkling, but this time, they were no longer empty. They seemed to blink slightly, close, and then open slowly. The feeling of fear grew inside me, but I still couldn't take my eyes off it. I reached out, trembling, to touch the glass cabinet. The glass was cold, but at that moment, I felt a cold air entering my hand, making me cringe. I quickly withdrew my hand and stepped back. Suddenly, the doll made an undeniable move. It tilted its head toward me, as if watching me, and I felt waves of fear run down my spine. I cannot understand what is happening. Where am I? Why do I feel like I'm entering another world, a world where this doll is more than just an old collectible? In my heart, the fear subsided a bit, replaced by a strange feeling, as if I was caught in a game with no way out. But I can't stop. Part of me wanted to let go, but another part urged me to dig deeper. I turned around and faced the doll, feeling the coldness still in the air. All I could do now was stand there, facing something I couldn't understand, couldn't explain, but was certain that it wasn't just an inanimate object. I stood silently in the dark, staring at the glass cabinet. Everything around me seemed to have returned to normal, but I couldn't erase the strange feeling and fear that was creeping inside me. It feels like I'm living in a nightmare I can't wake up from. I tried to breathe evenly, feeling each breath seem more difficult than ever. The atmosphere in the room became stuffy, as if the air around me had become thicker, heavier. I looked at the doll, the light flashed again, but this time, nothing happened. The glass cabinet was still tightly closed, there was no sign of movement. But inside me, the anxiety kept growing, as if there was something bigger, darker lurking, just waiting for me to be careless and pounce. My heart felt heavy when I looked at that doll. It stood there, unchanged, but I felt like it was watching me. Its glassy eyes were no longer just inanimate objects. It was as if they were immersing themselves in me, peering into the depths of my soul, discovering every secret fear. That feeling was something I couldn't stand. I decided, no matter how confused I was, I had to face it. I can't continue to live in fear, I can't let myself be controlled by these nightmares anymore. With every step I take, I feel the tension in my body. But I forced myself to walk over to the glass case, stopping just a few steps away from the doll. I reached out, trembling, and opened the closet door. Inside there was nothing but silence, empty shadows, and the doll stood silently, showing no signs of change. But when I looked closely, I realized that the doll was no longer standing in the same position. It had turned its head in another direction, as if facing me. An inexplicable feeling arose within me. It feels as if something is waiting for me. Not just a mindless doll, but an entity watching my every move. I began to feel suffocated, as if the atmosphere in this room was no longer mine, but hers. I stood there, unable to take my eyes off the doll, feeling like it was challenging me, like it knew I was scared and it wouldn't let me go until I faced it. But I know that I cannot stand still forever. Part of me wants to rush out of this room, run away from everything, but I can't. With one last effort, I turned around and walked quickly out of the room. But there is no consolation in leaving. I felt that presence still behind me, hovering, watching my every step. At this point, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. One day, as I was sitting in the living room, my eyes couldn't avoid the darkness of the hallway. A thick feeling surrounded me, as if something was watching me from afar, a presence that couldn't be seen but was clearly felt. Every time the light dimmed, I felt a movement at the end of the hallway, right behind the glass cabinet door where the doll had stood. I don't dare go there. My steps became slower and heavier than ever. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the faint sounds, like the gentle flickering of a glowing lamp, frightened me. I couldn't do anything but look into the distance ahead, where I knew the doll had once existed. I started to feel like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Long nights passed in fear, when I couldn't shake the feeling that something from my past was still watching me. The dreams about the doll never stopped, and every time I woke up I felt like I was being threatened by something inexplicable. One evening, while I was reading a book, I heard a small noise. A click came from the storage room. At first, I thought it was the wind or something strange moving. But then, the noise appeared again, this time clearer, as if someone was moving around in the dark, a very slight movement, very purposeful. I can't bear it anymore. I stood up, my heart pounding so hard that I felt as if I were standing in the middle of an inescapable land. I ran out, like a thoughtless reflex, not daring to look back. No matter where I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. That feeling was like a ghost silently following my every step, never leaving. And even though I took the doll away, it's still here, in my mind. That feeling still hasn't left. Every time I looked in the mirror, I waited, quietly hoping that my lips wouldn't change. But even as I believed I could avoid it, fear arose within me. My eyes couldn't hide what I knew had happened. The shadow of the doll, that red light, is always present in my mind. It never leaves me. Sometimes I wonder if I have truly escaped that obsession. Am I just living in a glittering world of self-deception? Every night, I try to sleep, but there is always something out of my sight, always a soft sound as if someone is moving around me. The feeling of coldness and tension gradually seeped into every cell in my body, as if that doll was still watching me from the darkness. And every time I heard an unknown melody, the fear returned, flooding me like a strong, unstoppable wave. Those melodies, although small, carry within them a deep fear that I cannot shake. I feared it might be a sign of something I couldn't understand, a bond I'd created, and now couldn't break. The doll, although imprisoned in a box, still exists within me. And when night comes, when everything seems quiet, I can't help but wonder if it's waiting, if it's listening in the distance, or worse, if it's begun to move again, restoring memories I've tried to forget. That presence is still there, always there, and I feel it in every moment of silence. With just a slight fluctuation, a glimpse in the mirror, a slight sound, I fell back into a fear I couldn't escape. That doll became part of me, and I became part of it. Can't say I won, can't say I escaped. Because this fear has no end, it is a part of my life, always waiting in the dark corners, in my dreams, within the walls of my house. The doll is still there, even if I don't see it, even if I don't hear it, I know it's still there, waiting. That feeling is always present in the hidden corners of the bathroom, as if someone is standing quietly in the dark, waiting for me. Every time I looked in the mirror, I felt her sharp gaze, not directly, but through a blurred reflection. She stood there, no words, no gestures, just a presence that I couldn't push away no matter how hard I tried. Every morning, when the light suddenly burst through the light switch, I felt the cold from behind me, the cold coming from the mirror, from the darkness where she was hiding. Sometimes I don't even dare to look in the mirror right away, as if I don't look, she won't be able to look back at me. But inevitably, my eyes turned to that place, where I knew she was standing, even though I couldn't see anything. At night, I can't turn off that feeling. She was a part of me, even though I couldn't understand it, even though I couldn't figure out why. That figure was attached to me, and no matter what I did, I knew she would be there, always waiting for me, in menacing silence. Cannot be erased, cannot be forgotten. She still exists, in every glimpse, in every darkness I enter. The only question I ask myself is, can I live with her forever, or will she one day step out of the mirror, becoming something I can't escape? But even though I convinced myself so, the cold feeling didn't let me go. No matter how hard I try to get rid of everything, that presence is always there, lurking in the dark corners of the bathroom, where I cannot avoid it. Every time I walked in, I felt her gaze, not really, but like a shadow always lurking in the mirror, waiting for me to look back. The sweet scent of the dark blue ribbon still lingered in the air, even though I opened the window to chase it away. That night, I couldn't sleep. My eyes kept wide open, the light from the dim nightlight illuminating my face, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Fleeting images of a ballroom, an eerie atmosphere, and distant music invaded my mind, making me feel like I was living in a dream or a nightmare that I couldn't escape. No matter how much I tried, I couldn't stop. The feeling of footsteps in the dark, the sound of gentle footsteps, repeated over and over in my mind. I tried to avoid it, but it seemed like it was waiting for me, looking for me, waiting for me to face it again. The truth is, I can't get rid of it. Maybe it wasn't just a hallucination or fatigue. Something is happening, and I can't understand it. Every time I tried to erase it, she came back, gently, but firmly. And I know, whether I like it or not, I will have to face her again. This feeling, an undeniable feeling, hit me at once, and I stared at the ribbon, feeling it weigh heavily on my wrist. A cold sensation had passed through my hand, and I could almost feel the coolness of the ribbon on my skin, even though I didn't remember wearing it. It was an intrusion, a clear trace of something I couldn't explain. It was like a reminder from another world, from the shadow in the mirror that was waiting for me. Confusion rose within me. How did it get here? How come I don't remember tying it? Every time I thought I had control over it, that presence lurked in every dark corner, in every reflection, and I couldn't escape. Faint footsteps in the night, twisted images appearing behind me in the mirror, all as if they were following me, not leaving me alone. And now, the dark blue ribbon, as if a mark of that presence. Fear began to creep into me, like a shadow that couldn't be chased away. Every time I look in the mirror, I see an image of her, slim, elegant, but not me. Her glassy eyes stared at me, and that smile, that half-smile, seemed to be telling me something I couldn't fully understand. I know she's waiting for me to face something I can't come back from. I feel like I'm stuck in a spiral with no way out. My hands were shaking, my left wrist still felt cold from the ribbon. No matter what I tried, no matter how hard I tried to banish those images, she was still there, in every reflection, in every shadow, waiting for me to face the truth. Now I only have one question: can I escape her, or have I become part of a haunting dream that cannot be ended? This feeling became more and more evident within me, like a presence weighing down every step I took. I couldn't leave that image, her image in the mirror, always there, reaching out like an irresistible invitation. The times I tried to avoid and hide the mirror, it made me feel even more pulled into a never-ending nightmare. Every night, I found myself trapped in those dreams, those dances in the pale yellow light, where I couldn't move, couldn't escape that woman's attention. That feeling of helplessness became a part of me, as if I were bound in an endless loop. And every time I wake up, I can't do anything but keep fighting myself, fighting the feeling that I can't hide from her. No matter how hard I tried to banish those images, the figures in the mirror would not disappear. She was still there, as if watching me, inviting me into her world, where everything had been twisted, where I was no longer myself. That dark blue bow, the terrifying gentleness of her gesture, it all served as a reminder that I had opened this door and couldn't close it. With each passing day, I felt more and more like I was losing control. That shadow, that feeling of presence, was no longer just a fleeting fear. It took over me. And I'm afraid that, no matter what I do, I won't be able to get out anymore. She will always be in the mirror, in my dreams, and perhaps, in my own mind. An unforgettable feeling, an obsession that is increasingly engraved in my mind. Even though she couldn't explain it, everything still lingered, the smell of what had passed, the blurry image of her in the mirror, and the indelible traces of her past. It was as if the ghosts in my life never truly disappeared, but were just waiting for a chance to return. Now, every time I look in the mirror, I no longer see just myself. I saw her, that woman, still present, if only for fleeting moments, as if a part of me had been taken away. The stray navy ribbons remain, an unmissable reminder of what I invited into my life. And now, in the stillness of the night, as soft music plays from somewhere in the darkness, I wonder if somewhere in my soul I have truly invited her in, accepted the inevitability of this confrontation. That feeling was a combination of fear and irresistible charm. The date on the screen was tomorrow, the day I was living right then, but in a strange way, the next day on the show. Immediately, a cold feeling spread throughout my body. I can't explain my uneasiness when I see details about events that haven't happened yet. Strange predictions that I never knew about. Anxiety took hold of me quickly, and I began to doubt whether I was facing something beyond my comprehension. Taking a deep breath, I cautiously turned off the TV, but the strange feeling still didn't let go. I sat there in the dark, my palms sweaty, not knowing if I was living in a distorted reality or if I was simply paranoid. But what makes me feel more scared is the silence after turning off the TV, the heavy emptiness as if everything is waiting for something next. I tried to reason, telling myself it was just a technical problem, or maybe I was imagining it all. But the strange feeling never left me, and every night after that, the TV turned on at exactly 11 o'clock, showing inexplicable images, information that made me unable to shake off the anxiety. I began to see that my uncle's watchtower was no longer a peaceful place. It became a place filled with mysteries, with signs I couldn't quite understand. But the strangeness continued. Every night, at exactly 11 o'clock, the TV would turn on by itself, broadcasting strange but precise events, as if I were living in some kind of inexplicable prophecy. My curiosity grew more and more. I couldn't stop taking notes. I couldn't stop looking for what would happen next. Matching lottery numbers, minor accidents, community announcements, all happened exactly as the program described. But gradually, I realized something more terrifying. Every time I confirmed a future event, I felt a deep sense of emptiness, as if I were slipping into a spiral with no way out. I began to wonder if I was being controlled by something, some force I couldn't understand. My uncle just said he didn't know anything about the TV, just asked if I got enough sleep. But deep down, I felt something was wrong. Every night, I try not to think about it, but I can't. I was starting to get paranoid, with the words on the screen becoming accurate predictions. And the scariest thing is that I can't stop thinking about what the next events will be. How long can this go on? Who is controlling that TV, and why does it know everything in advance? Reality has begun to blur. The events I recorded were approaching and I no longer had any control. I wanted to escape those predictions, but every time I saw TV, I was drawn into it, unable to stop. My fear grew, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop watching. I cannot separate myself from the grip of this feeling of fear. I stared at the TV screen, unable to look away, even though I knew I shouldn't. Time seemed to pass more slowly as I felt each tense moment. The later the night became, the heavier the air became, and in every sound of the wind whistling through the window, I seemed to hear the whisper of something inexplicable. The darkness in the tower grew thicker and thicker. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My body felt like it was being held down by an invisible force, like the room was trying to swallow me whole. Every slight noise, every flicker of the light startled me, as if something was watching me from a faraway place. Everything started to feel hazy, and I couldn't separate reality from this terrible fear. The night's ambiguity worsened as I began to suspect that everything I was experiencing might be part of some game. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't deny that all the facts were accurate. There's definitely something strange going on. All I could do now was wait, staring at the TV screen, waiting for what would happen next. And that fear, like a ghost, kept following me, unable to escape. I don't know what to do. Standing between a truth I couldn't understand and a panic I couldn't control, I felt like I was being drawn into a crack of no return. And as the night grew later, that feeling became even stronger, as if the shadow I feared was approaching, waiting for a chance to take me over completely. It felt heavy, as if the air had been crushed by an invisible weight. The sour smell made me frown, and I realized that it wasn't the smell of food or anything that could be explained. I approached the TV, where the dim light from the screen was still on. My head was tense as if an invisible hand was squeezing my mind. And then, right at the moment I touched the control key to turn off the TV, the image on the screen changed again. Not an old show. Not an accident or an ordinary event. That's me. I stood right there, in the dark room, staring at the TV. But what shook me was what I saw on the screen. It wasn't me as I knew myself. My eyes were blank, and a strange expression crossed my face, a smile I didn't recognize. I touched the control, but the image doesn't change. And then that voice rang out, but it wasn't from the TV. It came from somewhere in space, echoing in my head like a strange sound, but so close that I could feel every word. She won't let you go. A cold feeling spread from my shoulders down my spine, and I felt as if I was no longer the only person in the room. The noises outside, the wind and lightning, suddenly disappeared, and I stood there in absolute silence, with only the sound of whispers remaining. I can't keep looking at the screen. The feeling of being watched from all sides, from all the shadows in the room, made me tremble. I took a step back, then another, until I turned and ran down the stairs, not daring to stop. But no matter how hard I tried to leave the room, I couldn't escape the shadow that had touched my mind, the shadow that I couldn't erase. I tried to breathe deeply, but the worry still refused to leave me. The fresh air couldn't dispel the stuffy feeling in my chest. Standing under the dark sky, I tried to listen for any sounds, but there was nothing but the rustle of the wind and small animals gliding across the fields. I wanted to believe that I had escaped something, that it was all just nightmares piling up on top of each other. But then, I heard a strange noise from the direction of the warehouse. There was a light step, as if someone was moving inside. My heart pounded again. I turned back to look towards the warehouse. It's impossible to determine whether I actually heard that or not, but the tormenting feeling still doesn't let go. Unable to leave, I slowly turned around and walked towards the warehouse, each step heavy, my feet sinking into the ground as if I were wading through deep mud. As I approached the warehouse, I could see the narrow window shining a dim light from inside. This time, nothing was too strange, the old roof, the blackened logs, all still intact. But I couldn't erase the feeling that there was something waiting for me in there, hidden figures that I couldn't explain. I stood there, my legs shaking, my eyes staring intently at the window. Everything was silent, too silent. But in the air, there was a presence that I couldn't deny. I swear someone was there, just standing there watching, not saying a word. My breathing became heavy again, and I could do nothing but continue to stand still, not daring to take another step. A strong wind suddenly blew, twisting the surrounding leaves, but nothing else. I turned around again, suddenly realizing that I was in the middle of a strange loop that I couldn't escape. The sounds, the strange traces, all seemed to be leading me into a place I couldn't leave, a place where every trace led me back to this very tower. I knew I couldn't shake that feeling, and I probably never would. Something had awakened, a presence I couldn't explain. And no matter how hard I try, I feel like I'm slowly being drawn back to that place, where it all began. I couldn't escape the feeling that that watchtower had become a part of me, a touchpoint of inexplicable strangeness. Those images, those inexplicable marks, are all engraved in my mind, like scars that cannot heal. And every night, no matter how far away I am from the watchtower, I can still feel its presence, from the darkness outside to the haunting feelings it leaves in every corner of my room. To this day, I still can't erase my image from that old TV, distorted image, closed eyes, muddy body. Even though I had left that place, a part of me still felt like I was trapped in that scene, buried in the memory of an event that had not yet happened. The feeling was undeniable, as if what had started there, in the old tower, still stuck with me. Every time I look in the mirror, every time I try to escape the darkness of the past, a part of me is afraid that it will return, once again dragging me back into that loop, where there is no escape. Those traces, those strange images and sounds, all seem to be waiting for me, silently waiting from behind the mirror wall, from dark corners that I couldn't reach. Something has changed in me since that trip. I can't be sure anymore whether I've actually escaped that loop or not. Even as I tried to move on, to forget all that had happened, it continued to haunt me, like an inseparable ghost, a feeling I couldn't escape, no matter where I went or what I did. And so I sit here again, in my room, where light can never dispel that darkness. Whenever I stopped looking at the reflections, the old scenes reappeared, and I felt the eyes of the woman in the mirror still staring at me, ready to continue the dance I couldn't escape. The atmosphere in the studio was still heavy and cold, as if everything was engulfed in an invisible darkness that could not be escaped. The pale light from the lamp on the wall weakly shines on the porcelain dolls in the cabinet, making them more strange and scary than ever. They were no longer lifeless decorations, but now each doll had a clear presence in space, their eyes staring at me, as if knowing I was scared and watching my every move. That feeling, that presence watching, was impossible to shake. Every time I walk past the cabinet, I clearly feel their eyes following every step. I can't understand, I only know that they are gradually taking over my space, taking over my mind. When I went into the bedroom, the images of the doll were still haunting my mind. I tried to shake my head to chase them away, but in the darkness, I still saw glass eyes shining in the darkness. The noise from the phone woke me up. The feeling of confusion came back, as if some force wanted my attention. The light from the phone screen blinded me. It's just midnight, why does it turn on by itself? That feeling wasn't a random glitch, it had a purpose, some message being sent to me. When I opened my eyes and noticed the text on the screen, I felt my body freeze. Ancient chants, cold French echoed in the room, vague and harsh. That voice was not mine, but it penetrated every cell in my body, penetrating my mind. And then, that sound quietly changed. As I started to turn around and walk out of the room, I heard a very small noise from the hallway outside. The sound of glass sliding, a sharp and clear sound, made my heart pound. I stepped out of bed, my hands shaking, trying to control my body, but each step seemed to become heavier. My footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway, as if someone was following me, the footsteps of an invisible force, but I couldn't turn back. As I approached the cabinet, I felt a cold air run down my spine, my breathing became rapid. In the dim darkness, I saw it, the image of dolls, but now they weren't just porcelain dolls in a glass cabinet anymore. They walked out of that place. The light from the lamp on the wall cast strange shadows, and I saw a vague figure standing near the cabinet. Unable to explain, I hastily stepped back, a feeling of fear filling my body. Every step seemed to slow down, as if an invisible force was blocking me, making it impossible for me to escape this space. In the darkness, I realized the dolls were moving. Those eyes weren't just reflected in the glass, but it seemed like they saw me, coming closer to me, as if preparing to take me into another world, a world that was not mine. I quickly opened the door and walked out but couldn't get out. Everything around me seemed to be suffocating me, making it impossible for me to breathe. Every little noise, every movement I made was being monitored, as if those dolls were moving around, watching my every move. These hallucinations are no longer just fantasies. They are real. At this point, I felt like I was caught in a loop that I couldn't escape from. The presence of the dolls is not just a memory but a part of me, slowly taking over me. And when I turned back to face the cabinet, those eyes were no longer in the glass. They were looking out, looking at me. This feeling is too real, too strong to deny. These are not delusions, these are not hallucinations. This is another world where those dolls live, and I accidentally entered it. The numbness in my body almost made it impossible for me to get out of bed. The sun was shining but it couldn't ease the tension filling my body. I still feel the presence of the dolls, their images still cling to my mind, invading every cell. As I cautiously approached the cabinet, my heart skipped a beat, but I couldn't turn back. As I saw it, they were back in place. 20 porcelain dolls, neatly arranged, eyes still facing me, as if they were waiting for me to do something. I shook my head, wondering if this was a game of my mind. Maybe I was tired, maybe strange events had made me lose control, but there was no denying that these dolls were not like ordinary decorations. They held some power, something inexplicable, as if they could see deep inside me. I blinked, trying to forget the horrifying images of last night, but they were still clearly present in my memory. I began to retreat from the closet, my eyes still glued to the dolls as if they were watching my every move. My legs were shaking, my body felt like it wanted to give up. I tried to walk to the door of the room, wanting to get out of this place, but my steps couldn't go any faster. It feels like I'm caught in a spiral with no way out, where everything feels hazy and I can't find any certainty. When I went out into the hallway, the space became unusually quiet. The sound of my breathing seemed to echo throughout the house. Nothing but silence weighed on me. I looked into the cabinet, at the porcelain dolls whose presence I couldn't explain. I feel like I'm trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The feeling of fear pushed me out of the room, but I couldn't leave this place. Is this the end, or have I just begun to discover something deeper? These questions constantly surround me, with no answers. All I can do is keep walking, trying to live on in the surrounding fear. But I can't help but feel that one day, when I return, those dolls will no longer be standing still. They would keep moving, keep following me, taking me into a world I couldn't understand. And I still have to live in that fear, when the light of day cannot dispel the darkness of strange silhouettes, dolls, and unsolved mysteries. I dragged my suitcase through the door, feeling like the floor beneath my feet was becoming thin, unreal, as if there was an invisible layer of fog covering everything around me. Stepping out into the cold morning air, I took a deep breath, but immediately felt a strange, unusual cold. The sky was overcast, although it was bright, the light seemed unable to dispel the heaviness of the atmosphere. It felt like something was following me, which left me unable to do anything but hastily walk away. As I stood next to the car, about to open the door to leave, I noticed something reflected in the windshield. I couldn't make out clearly, but it was a vague silhouette, like a porcelain doll. Something pounded in my chest, a feeling of restlessness invaded my body. I turned my head to look towards the studio building, but everything was still quiet, only the thin wind blew. I told myself it was just my mind playing games. It's impossible, the dolls can't move. But in that moment, a thought crossed my mind: if they could do it once, why couldn't they do it again? A panic came over me, forcing me to shake my head to get rid of those thoughts. I sat in the car, turned the key and started the engine. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, once again, I saw them. The porcelain dolls, lined up behind me in the cupboard, their eyes flashed, but not in the reflection of the sun. It was a cold, unnatural light, as if an invisible force was monitoring my every move. I stepped on the gas and left, my hand still shaking on the steering wheel. The feeling of tension still wouldn't let me go, and when I looked in the rearview mirror again, everything was gone. Only the opaque glass remains, reflecting an empty space. But I couldn't erase that image from my head, couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond my control was silently waiting. As I drove off campus, the studio disappeared from view, but it's haunting, those dolls never left me. Their silhouettes are always hovering, a reminder that not everything we see is reality. And not every obsession can be left behind. As I look ahead, I wonder whether the secrets hidden in those dolls will forever haunt me, or whether I can truly escape their influence. But no matter what, I know one thing for sure: I will never be able to forget what I witnessed in that studio, and I will never feel safe looking at reflections again. And in that hesitation, I began to realize that I was being sucked into a spiral that I couldn't escape from. My feeling of fear changed, from a simple feeling of insecurity to a deep obsession, as if that house and those dolls were imprinted on my mind. When I wake up in the mornings, I can still feel the breath of presence in the room, as if something was watching me from a dark corner that I couldn't see. I can't explain the connection between me and those porcelain dolls. They are no ordinary collectibles. They seem to have their own soul, a strange power controlling them from outside my sight. And what I felt in that closet, their inexplicable absence, made me even more afraid. They may no longer be there, but they are still finding ways to hold me, as if they had never left. There were nights when I woke up at 3:06 a.m., right at the time I experienced those terrifying moments. Time has never been my companion since I stepped out of that studio. The nightmares were dense. Those dolls stood around my bed, silently observing. Their glass eyes seemed to sparkle in the darkness. The dim light was not enough to dispel the suffocating feeling. The soft tapping on the glass, the illusory sounds of moving objects, and all the strange things I couldn't stop thinking about. I couldn't talk about this with anyone, for fear that if I did, it would make the presence even more real. Sometimes, I wonder if I can completely let go of these memories, or if they will continue to haunt me like a curse, an undeniable truth. Every time I look in the mirror, I wonder if the dolls are standing behind me, waiting for me to look back again. Even though I left, and the room remained just a quiet place, a part of me always felt trapped there, in the claustrophobic space, where I couldn't completely shake off the fear. The truth is, I can never forget their cold eyes, their porcelain dolls, and the secrets they kept in their own dim light. And so, I continue to live in obsession, even though I no longer live in that house. But every time I close my eyes, I see them again, waiting. Those porcelain dolls are always by my side, never letting go. That video still haunts me. The faint but undeniable image of that empty road, that slope, and especially the stop sign, has not left my mind. I can't explain why, but it felt strange when I realized it in real life, as if time and space no longer obeyed normal laws. That feeling confused me. I couldn't ignore the feeling that everything in my life was being messed up in a strange, incomprehensible way. The feeling of being pushed into a loop with no way out becomes increasingly clear. Every time I try to convince myself that it's just a coincidence, I get other signs, small but very specific details, that remind me that something is very wrong. One day, while passing another street, I noticed a car identical to the one in the video, parked in the exact same spot on the sidewalk. My heart pounded again, and I had to stop for a moment to regain my composure. It felt like a trap that I couldn't get out of, couldn't avoid. Some evenings, when the TV turns on and the screen is just a streak of static, I can almost hear it, the soft hiss, followed by the sudden transition into shots of the places I've passed. Wondering if I'm being watched? Or is it all just a coincidence and my mind is slowly falling apart? I can't tell anyone about this. No one can understand the strangeness of these situations. I didn't dare tell my friends or relatives because I was afraid they would think I was crazy. Actually, I also wondered if I was being haunted by something that wasn't real, or was I actually witnessing something beyond human explanation. These roads, these cars, these stop signs, they all started to become signals, as if they were leading me to something I wanted to do. My mind started playing games with me. Every time I look in the mirror, I see myself, but sometimes my eyes look different. Those eyes were deeper, looking straight at me as if I were standing outside of myself. I began to wonder if the nightmares were the reality I was living, or was I trapped in a parallel reality that I couldn't escape. The tension in my body cannot be relieved. Every time I go out, I feel like I'm being watched, as if an invisible shadow is following me. The strange sounds in the middle of the night, the blurry images on the TV screen, they were like whispers, constantly reminding me that there was something, a force, lurking around me. And then, in the dark nights, I caught vague images in the mirror. Someone's eyes were watching me, still those eyes, my eyes but not mine. What I felt couldn't be explained by normal logic. Can I escape this trap? Or is it all just cracks in my mind, wrong thoughts? No one can help me answer this question, and I don't know if I have the courage to face the truth, even the strangest and scariest truth. Each scene was so clear that I could make out the smallest details, like the smudges on the windows, the darkness behind the walls, and the light from the street lamps dimly shining through the glass doors. But what made me feel goosebumps was when the camera slowly moved from my window out, lasting every second, as if someone was watching me from the outside. I couldn't believe my eyes. I felt an extreme shock when the last image on the screen was the view from outside my own window. The screen lit up, reflecting the room I was in. It was me. I was standing looking at the TV, feeling the coldness of the dark night. And outside the window, a figure stood there, just a step away from me. In that moment, I felt a wave of fear wash over me, as if everything I had witnessed over the past few nights had led to this moment. I wanted to run away, but I couldn't move. The shadow outside the window didn't move, it just stood there, silently, as if waiting for something. My whole body seemed to freeze with fear. I tried to regain control. My heart was pounding, my hand shaking as I reached for the remote control. I pressed the TV off button, but there was no response. The screen remained on, and the shadow outside the window did not disappear. It still stands there, like an indelible presence. When I turned around and looked towards the window, I couldn't breathe. My eyes were blurry with tears, and I didn't know if I was dreaming or not. But when I looked back, that figure still hadn't moved. It was like a part of the darkness, attached to the room I was standing in. I tried to step back, not daring to look back again, but my eyes still couldn't leave that figure. That suffocating feeling was indescribable, as if I was stuck in a trap that I couldn't escape from. Every second that passed made me feel more trapped, as if that shadow was getting closer, preparing to do something I couldn't understand. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed out, not paying attention to everything around me. Everything became blurry, as if I was living in a nightmare with no way out. The images from the TV still stuck with me, reminding me that there was something waiting for me, always there, just outside my sight. No matter how hard I tried to run away, I knew I would never be able to escape that feeling. Something is still watching me, an invisible shadow is always there, waiting for me. And every time I turn around, I know it will never leave me. I was startled when I felt that coldness. A shiver ran down my spine, making me stop for a second. My eyes were glued to the dark screen, where the faint light seemed to emanate from the surrounding space itself, creating a terrifying sight. The smell of burning electricity and the cold air from the electronics made me feel like I was trapped in a space between reality and a nightmare. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, run out of this apartment and never come back. But another part forced me to step forward, as if an invisible force was pulling me towards the TV. I knew I couldn't leave it like that, I couldn't ignore what was happening. With trembling hands, I slowly reached out to the screen and touched that cold part. It felt like my hand had just touched ice. This time, the screen lit up. It doesn't show street scenes or strange frames like before. Instead, the image, clearer than ever, was of my apartment, from my exact perspective, with me standing near the TV. Every detail was as clear as if it had been filmed from this very room, from an angle I couldn't have had while in there. I felt like I was seeing myself from the outside, like an outsider witnessing what I was doing. But there's one thing that's not right. Even though I stood there, the porcelain dolls appeared in the frame, appearing from behind me. They stood lined up right in front of the screen, their eyes not moving, but with a strange presence, as if they were watching me. A doll was almost in the center, with a mouth curled up as if smiling, but that smile was not one of joy. It was like a reminder, a silent warning that I couldn't understand. Their eyes looked straight at me, cold and emotionless, making my skin shiver. And then, a shot from behind. I'm back. But there was no one in the room. There was no human figure, only one's own shadow reflected on the dolls, as if they were waiting for something, a story that hadn't ended yet. Suddenly, the chanting sounded again, this time clearer than ever. That voice is not just from the TV. It was like a whisper from the very air around me. A wave of dizziness hit me, making me unable to stand anymore. It felt like some force was pushing me towards the TV. I can no longer breathe. My body seemed to be gradually leaving reality. I woke up startled, completely unable to remember when I fell asleep. The room was silent again, but the atmosphere around me was still tense. I looked at the TV screen. Nothing. Everything returned to normal, as if I had dreamed a nightmare. But a strange feeling still stuck with me. The eyes of those dolls are still present in my mind, watching me like a warning. Something I can't escape. In that moment, I realized that I couldn't escape this place, I couldn't escape what was pursuing me. An invisible fear enveloped me, not from the TV or the dolls, but from the realization that there were things in this world that I could not explain, could not control. And whether I wanted it or not, it was attached to me, like an inescapable shadow. I can't breathe. What I'm seeing can't be real. The screen accurately showed my hallway, every detail so clear that I could see the cracks in the walls and dust marks on the floor. I stood there, unable to move, as if I was frozen in this moment. The door to my room opened wide, and I saw myself from behind, a lonely figure reaching for the TV. The porcelain dolls in the display appeared again, this time from a dark corner, each standing directly behind me in the apartment's hallway. Their glassy eyes stared at me, lifeless but haunting. My eyes looked at them, then at myself in the screen. I found myself moving, looking at the TV as if I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and immediately, I realized, it was me in the screen, doing exactly what I was doing in that moment. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that it wasn't just the dolls that were moving. No, there's still me. I was doing what I did, I was standing there, in this same space, but in another world, a place that I couldn't reach. And from somewhere, a voice rang in my ears, a soft but clear whisper, like a warning, this time, you can't escape. My eyes began to blur, my mind was spinning. Something was pulling me into the screen, into that place, where the dolls were waiting for me, where I was no longer there. I felt a strange gravity, as if I was being sucked into the screen, into another world that I couldn't understand. I wanted to run, I wanted to escape, but my body no longer listened to me. And then, like a clap of thunder, everything became still. The screen is black, no image, no sound. Everything around me became eerily quiet. I stood there, breathing heavily, not daring to move. I don't know what to do. I don't know what's waiting for me behind the screen, in this world or another. But I know one thing, I can't escape it anymore. However, after that night, my life gradually returned to normal, at least on the surface. I still wake up every night around 3 a.m., feeling a chill run down my spine, a feeling as if I'm still being watched from somewhere in the dark. But I don't feel that fear anymore. Maybe it's gone, or maybe it's just waiting, lurking somewhere in dark corners that I can't see. I don't know if I've really gotten away with it or not. Part of me still believes that I haven't seen it all, that something is still secretly watching me. Sometimes, when I look into the mirror in my apartment, my eyes will not meet myself immediately, but will wait a little longer, as if there is someone behind me. I don't dare look into the darkness in the evenings for too long. I can't stand that feeling again. In the months that followed, I moved out of that apartment, found a peaceful place and distanced myself from those memories. But even after changing my living environment, I couldn't completely escape the feeling that everything I'd been through was still chasing me. Sometimes, I stop in the middle of a crowded street, raise my head, and there is a strange moment. I think I see the silhouette of someone standing in the distance, eyes staring at me, as if they were always there, always waiting. It's difficult to describe all the emotions I faced. Fear is not simply anxiety or tension, but a presence that you cannot deny, no matter how far you run away. It will find you, like the dolls in the closet, staring at you even when you think you've escaped them. And those chanting sounds, those unidentifiable sounds, like the whispers of something ancient and terrifying, still echoed in my mind. I no longer dare to enter dark rooms without caution. It's inevitable that in the quiet moments of the night, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I still feel that presence. Something is still waiting in the dark. It never left, and I couldn't chase it away. It has become a part of me, like a ghost I can't escape. And so, I live with it. Reality and illusion blended together, to the point where I was no longer sure which was the truth. The images, silhouettes, and sounds will still follow me, waiting to reappear, like an unfinished story. A story that I cannot escape. The metallic smell still lingered in the air, making my throat dry, and I couldn't shake the cold feeling that ran down my spine. The next time, it came again. Not every night, but enough to keep me on my toes. Sometimes, I'll see a faint red light reflected in kitchen items, though nothing obvious. And when I quietly approached, it disappeared again, leaving no trace except an indescribable feeling of insecurity. Every time I do that, I become more and more tired, my eyes can no longer easily find peace. Night is a scary time, when I cook or work alone in the cold kitchen. Surely I had never seen it before, but it seemed each time the feeling came back stronger. The feeling that something has touched this space, waiting for me, not with any specific shape but with a vague presence, like a ghost in my own life. Gradually, I began to realize that it was not just a physical sighting but also a feeling of an inexplicable observation. Those shadows, those strange shapes, felt like they were following me not because they wanted to hurt, but to monitor, to exist in my space. Maybe it was there long before I realized it, like a trace of the past that cannot be erased, silently waiting for me to face it. I tried explaining to myself that it was just paranoia, maybe due to stress from work, from living alone in this apartment, in my cold kitchen. But I know that part of me cannot simply ignore what happened. Every night, anxiety rises when I flip the light switch, when I turn my back on the soundless walls, where every hidden corner might hide something. I began to fear that it wasn't the darkness but something deeper, more terrifying that was clinging to this apartment. It wasn't just a strange red light or the brief disappearance of a figure, it was a presence, a constant warning that I wasn't alone. And no matter how hard I try to ignore or avoid it, I know I won't be able to completely escape it. That's when I realized, maybe I was inviting it into my life myself. I turned around, not daring to look, but that figure was still there. The feeling of it, almost clinging to me, made the air seem thick and heavy. I could almost feel its oppression, like an invisible presence quietly waiting for me to face it. Every night, I stand in the kitchen, I can hear the refrigerator beeping, the shadows from the haunting wall, and in my heart is a strange urge, as if that shadow is following me into every corner of this house. Every time I look in the mirror, I see images that don't belong to me, like I'm seeing something from another world, a world I don't want to know. I thought everything would be fine if I just left this place, but that presence still followed me, like an inescapable shadow. Everywhere I went, I felt a strange coldness, as if I was always being watched. Long nights passed in silence, with only the sound of the engines in the house, and I couldn't help but think about the silhouettes and traces they left in my life. But one night, when I finally decided to face it, I went to that coffee shop. The feeling of fear did not leave me, but I knew that I had to solve everything, had to face it. I walked into the shop, and just like in a dream, everything seemed to have changed. The chemical smell in the air made me feel suffocated. And as soon as I sat down, I noticed something strange. It wasn't silence like I expected, but a heavy pause, as if time had stopped here. A dim red light came from behind the window like a rising fire. But those feelings, those inexplicable flashbacks, have not left me. I stood there, breathing rapidly, feeling the tension rising from within. The air seemed stuffy, heavy, as if something invisible was still floating around. The whole kitchen became blurry in my eyes, and I couldn't escape the feeling that that shadow was still somewhere nearby, even though I couldn't see it. I turned back to the refrigerator, my heart pounding as I thought about the strange signs I had seen. The refrigerator door was closed, but an unclear cold feeling spread in the room, as if something inside was trying to escape. They weren't crazy thoughts or fantasies, but feelings, a feeling of horror that I couldn't explain. Just like that, every night is a war. Every day, I convince myself that I won't go back to that cafe, that it's over. But strange numbers and images appeared again, and it was impossible to shake that feeling from my mind. I couldn't stop thinking that everything I saw wasn't a coincidence. Places, figures, silhouettes were following me, as if I had been forced into a vortex with no way out. Once again, I stood in the darkness of the kitchen, looking at the shadows on the floor, wondering if I could get out of this. Or will these images continue to chase me forever? A still ghost, standing there in silence, watching me. This feeling of inevitability makes me feel unsafe in my own home. The space became too large, too silent, as if someone was always there, watching my every step. Every time I turned around, I expected to see something, a shadow, a faint light, or simply a feeling of someone standing behind me. I started counting each step, each decision. Am I overdoing it? Or have I entered another world where inexplicable events, strange things, suddenly and hauntingly appear? I don't know anymore. Sometimes, I wonder if those figures are a part of me, if they are saying things that my mind cannot understand. That night, after turning off the lights and getting ready for bed, I felt the cold chill of tension again. The kitchen door was still slightly open, the light from the kitchen door illuminating the darkness outside, making everything blurry. I suddenly realized that those figures, whether they were products of my imagination or not, were still lurking in that darkness. The silence in the room became so heavy that I could hear my every breath. The feeling that I am not alone, that something exists in this space, continues to haunt me. It's not just a shadow or a nihilistic concept, it's something alive, real, lurking somewhere in the dark corners of this house. Every night, I feel like I'm once again entering the realm of nightmares, where reality and fantasy are no longer clearly distinguishable. Finally, I couldn't resist the urge anymore. I decided to face everything that was happening, whether it meant losing my sanity or not. But in the peace of the night, I felt that maybe, everything had a reason, a mysterious way that I couldn't yet understand. The shadow is always present, lurking in every moment, reminding me of something beyond my control, beyond my understanding. And then, at that moment, once again, I looked towards the kitchen door, where the light was still shining from the wall lamp. That figure appeared again, passing through the refrigerator door, inviting me to come. It seems that everything is ready for a final confrontation. But am I ready to face it, or will I continue to run away forever? I stood there, in the cold kitchen, fear crashing over me like a heavy wave. Every sound in the house seemed to become sharper, more indistinct, as if the space was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen next. That feeling, the feeling that something was following me, leading me, inescapably. I don't know what it wants from me, but every time I think about it, fear rolls up inside me, overwhelming my reason. I felt like I was stuck in a never-ending loop. These manifestations, images, predictions, and shadows have become a part of my life. No matter how much I try to stay away, they still lurk around me, threatening in every corner. I cannot deny that there is some powerful force that is controlling me, guiding me in ways that I cannot understand. I went through those scenes, step by step, event by event. And every time I think I'm free of them, they reappear, like an unbreakable loop. The numbers, the signs, the red silhouettes, all lead me to turns that I cannot choose. I followed its prompts, going to the places it led me to, as if I had no right to refuse. And now, I am faced with a big choice: continue to face it, or accept that my life has been dominated by something I cannot control? When I think about what happened, I cannot deny the fact that I have changed. I was no longer myself, not the person living in that apartment, amidst invisible noises and inexplicable signs. Everything around me is now hazy, only a strange feeling remains, a persistent fear like a ghost that cannot be shaken off. Perhaps I will never find out the reason, nor know the purpose of all this. But one thing I know for sure is that I will never be able to go back to the way I was before. No matter what I do, those silhouettes, those strange signs, will forever remain in my mind, as an inseparable part of life. And I realized that the fear they brought had become a part of me, inescapable, undeniable. So I decided to live with it. I will learn to accept and live with the presence of those strange things, to not let them control me anymore. But deep down, I knew that no matter how hard I tried, would never escape that shadow. The shadow will always be there, a part of me, and there's nothing I can do to change that. And so I continue with my life, with an eternal awareness that fear and mystery will forever be there, waiting in the dark. When the vases stand there, facing each other, they are more than just ordinary decorations. A strange feeling kept lingering around me, as if they didn't belong in this space, as if they weren't born to lie quietly in a modern living room. That feeling was not an obvious fear, but an inexplicable one, like a sound tearing through space, one that could only be felt but not touched. I could feel their presence, even though they didn't move or make a sound. Every time I pass by them, I feel their eyes following me. The jars, with their ancient exteriors, were decorated with intricate patterns, sharp lines, but their gaze, an indescribable gaze, was penetrating me, strangling my heart. That night, as I sat in the living room, the light from the fluorescent lamp shone on the surface of the vases, casting long shadows, turning them into living beings in the darkness. I tried to shake that strange feeling away, telling myself that this was just a psychological reaction, an unconscious anxiety. But not long after that, events began to happen. At first it was just soft noises, like the sound of something hitting each other in the dead of night. Sometimes it's a light, clicking sound, sometimes it's a soft breathing sound, as if someone is standing nearby. I can't explain it, but I started to notice that these sounds only appeared when I was in the living room, and always late at night, when the air was still and thick. One evening, as I sat watching TV, the jars were no longer stationary on the mantel. One of them, the smaller jar, had moved, slowly rolling across the wooden surface, making a dry noise as if they were trying to escape the restraints of this space. I jumped up, panic spreading quickly through my body. I walked over and put my hand on the jar, but the feel of it made me shiver. The ground beneath my feet seemed to move, as if the space around me was no longer stable. I examined the jar carefully, turning it in my hand, and when I looked inside, I saw that there was something shiny, like a piece of metal, lying at the bottom. It was a small, hard piece of gold with an ancient pattern engraved on it. I couldn't explain why it was in the bottle, or what it had to do with the strange events I had experienced. I began to feel that I had opened a door that I could not close, that these jars were not just antiques, but perhaps part of a ritual that I could not understand. The truth is, I no longer feel safe in my home. It was as if an invisible force was controlling me, forcing me to face something I couldn't explain. Those Inca jars weren't just objects, they were a reminder, a sign of something far beyond what I could understand. And even though I could convince myself that all of this was just paranoia, a deep part of me knew that there were forces I couldn't control, and they were waiting. Every night, I no longer sleep well. I dream of those jars, of the twisted figures, of the whispers. And every morning I wake up, I can't help but feel that the peace I seek is just a thin shell. The jars were still there, like silent guardians, waiting, as if they knew something I wasn't ready to understand. The presence of the jars became more evident with each passing day. They are no longer just decorative items. They seem to carry a spiritual weight that I cannot explain. Every time I pass by them, I feel their intrusion into my space, as if they are taking over a corner of my mind. I started dreaming about them, strange dreams where I stood in a dark space, unable to move, while the jars slowly moved around me, pushing me into a vortex from which I could not escape. Their presence is not just a physical feeling but also an invisible power that covers, making the surrounding space dense. As I sat in the living room, the atmosphere became heavier. Every movement I make seems to shatter space, but when I look at them, they don't change. Every time I looked into their lifeless eyes, I felt an inexplicable connection, as if they knew something I couldn't see. One evening, while I was sitting at work, the jars began to make clicking sounds again. This time it wasn't just the clicking sound of clay like before, but a clearer sound, like the sound of a heavy object being pressed down. I couldn't tell what it was, but part of me was sure it was slowly breaking. Suddenly, I felt the golden sparkles appear again, but not on the floor anymore. They float in the air, blinking like small stars. I stood up, feeling a cold sweat run down my spine. My eyes looked at the golden particles floating in front of me, and then they slowly fell, curled up into a small cloud, and then disappeared into the air. I can't understand. Things started to become inexplicable. These phenomena are not a coincidence anymore. They were a series of events, a hidden message, something going on that I couldn't fully perceive. I couldn't leave the room. Every night, I sit there, looking at the jars, feeling their gaze. I felt like I was standing between two worlds, the real world and the world that the jars created. I began to doubt everything I knew about reality. Gold particles, strange sounds, reflections I couldn't explain, all haunted me, making me wonder if I was living in a long dream. One night, I decided, I couldn't take it anymore, would find a way to destroy them. Either way, I can't live with this fear, I can't let these bottles rule my life. I grabbed the hammer, but when I looked back, I saw them standing there, still, not moving at all. At that moment, I suddenly felt a cold wind run through my body, and I suddenly realized, I cannot destroy them. They are not simple matter to be broken, but something deeper, more powerful. Part of me feels like I've given up too much, letting these strange things take over my life. But on the other hand, I can't stop thinking that there is a reason behind all these events. Those jars may be part of a secret I cannot yet understand. And in that quiet moment, I couldn't help but feel that they were still waiting for me to face them, waiting for me to realize the truth that I was still not ready to accept. However, the heavy silence was just a lull before the next storm. Those jars haunted me constantly, and one morning, as I stood before the mirror, I noticed their reflection in my eyes, sparkling like an undeniable sign. It felt as if I had fallen into a dream and couldn't get out. I can't forget last night's dreams, where I found myself standing among snow-covered mountain peaks, shadowy figures all around me, chanting like curses that kept echoing in the wind. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, unable to remember what I had done. I walked into the living room and saw those jars pointing towards me, as if waiting for me to face them. The whole space felt heavy, as if I were standing in an ancient ritual that I didn't fully understand. Faint numbers reappeared in the dust, inexplicable. I gasped, a feeling of suffocation engulfing me. I began to suspect that I was being watched, not just by the jars but by things I had no control over. My every move seemed to be monitored. Sometimes, I think someone is standing behind me, watching every step. I could feel that presence even though I couldn't see anything, and sometimes I heard sounds without explanation, whispers as if someone was whispering in the wind. And then, one morning, I noticed a real change. The jars no longer stood on the mantel. They had been placed in a corner of the room, tilted towards me, as if they were waiting for me to come back to them. I don't dare come closer. No matter how hard I try to avoid them, they are still there, constantly reminding me of something I don't fully understand. It's hard to distinguish between fact and fantasy, but I know I can't simply ignore them forever. For a moment, I felt as if I was caught in a game I couldn't escape from. The jars, the sounds, the dream images, they all trapped me in a never-ending vortex. Part of me wanted to leave it all, but another part couldn't let go, like an inevitable confrontation. One day, I decided to go back and face the jars again. When I got close to them, I felt as if they were aware of my presence. My gaze met theirs, and in that moment, I felt as if I had participated in a ritual for which I had never been prepared. Feelings of fear and curiosity are intertwined, unable to be clearly distinguished. I knew that part of me was ready to explore, but another part was terrified of what would happen next. When I touched the bottle, a slight sound rang out. A sigh of air, like a door opening. A wave of cold washed over me, and I felt the movement of the air around me. The jars are no longer lifeless objects. They seemed conscious, and in that moment, I realized that I had entered a game that I had no control over. A game full of ghosts and mysteries. I stood in front of the jar, my palms sweaty, my body stiff, almost unable to breathe. When I looked inside, a suffocating feeling enveloped me. The scene inside the jar appeared again, this time not just my office but a much more horrifying scene. I saw myself, a copy of me, but something was wrong. There was a feeling of emptiness, as if I was looking at a me that was not me. The version of me in the jar still sat there, in front of the screen, tapping away at the keyboard. But the light in that room was not the light I usually use. It dimmed, as if from a light source not of this world. The scenery around me, including the desk, the messy documents, and the empty coffee cup, were covered in a hazy layer of fog. I couldn't take my eyes off my reflection, feeling like I had fallen into a deep hole, unable to get out. The copy of me in the bottle never looked up, never moved freely. It still types, despite everything. Suddenly, a sound rang out, a strange click from the small computer screen, as if an invisible command had been given. This scene was not an ordinary reflection. It felt as if I was trapped in another version of myself, a realm of existence that was not me, but was me. I felt a chill run down my spine. At this moment, the air in the room seemed heavier, as if an invisible pressure was increasing, pushing me into the dark corner of the room. I can't bear it anymore. I quickly turned around, stepping back with a hurried feeling as if I was running away from something I couldn't see, but felt clearly. I ran away from the living room, and this time, I didn't dare return. Even though I locked the door behind me, the feeling of presence in the house did not disappear. I lay in bed, quietly, trying to calm down, but those images kept coming back to my mind, becoming clearer and clearer. I wonder if I'm haunted by those jars, or if it's the strange things in this house that are affecting my mind. The feeling of fear still clings to me, not letting go easily. I wonder, can I get out of this spiral? Or is this just the beginning of a nightmare that I can no longer control? There was only one question in my mind: have I become a part of this game? In the end, the character left the house and the jars, but the obsession still lingered, like a stain that could not be washed away. Even though we have tried to start over, the new space, even though it seems more peaceful, still contains invisible whispers and indelible traces of the past. The Inca jars, although left behind, still exist in the character's mind. Every night, in dreams, clay figures continue to type on invisible keyboards, a reminder of transactions that cannot be undone, decisions that have determined fate. The shadow of the past never truly disappears. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, the sound of clay moving and the smell of metal make the character's heart tighten, causing all old memories to revive in the mind, as if they were existing in a parallel space, ready to remind that not all decisions can be erased. The story ends in ambiguity, with a not entirely clear realization that the character has escaped the influence of the jars. Even though I tried to run away, the fear never truly disappeared. What happened? The invisible transactions that the character participated in continue to linger, like an inevitable ghost in real life. Horror is not something that only appears in dreams or in the dark. It has become a part of the character, an inseparable part. And in that silence, between the light of day and the darkness of night, the character understands that there are things that cannot be explained, and there are things that forever exist in our minds, no matter how hard we try to forget.